Section 1, Eggs 110. There is something quietly magical about a show that has been running long enough to hide things inside itself. Not just jokes, not just references, but entire layers of meaning tucked into the corners of frames that most people will never pause on, never rewind to examine, never even notice are there. The Simpsons has been doing this since before the internet existed to catch it. Since before people had the ability to freeze a frame and zoom in and debate what a background sign actually said, the writers and animators were hiding things anyway. They were doing it for themselves, for the small pleasure of knowing that a detail existed even if nobody found it for 20 years. That is what this is about. We are going to move slowly through 101 of those details. Some of them are tiny. Some of them are enormous once you understand the context. Some of them will make you smile. Some of them will make you look at episodes you have seen dozens of times and feel like you are watching them for the first time. We are going to take our time with each one. There is no rush. The whole point is to settle in, let the voice wash over you, and drift through Springfield at whatever pace feels right tonight. So get comfortable. Close your eyes if you want. This is going to take a while. Easter Egg 1. The very first hidden joke in the entire series. Before we get into the deep cuts and the freeze-frame discoveries, it is worth starting at the very beginning. Because the very first hidden joke in The Simpsons was placed there in the pilot episode, and most people who have watched that episode dozens of times have never noticed it. The episode is called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. It aired on the 17th of December, 1989. Most of the attention in that episode goes to the main plot, which follows Homer discovering he will not be receiving his Christmas bonus and secretly taking a job as a department store Santa to make up the difference. The emotional beats of that episode are so well known they barely need describing. Homer at the dog track, Santa's little helper losing the race, the family adopting the dog instead of buying presents. It is a genuinely touching piece of television, which is remarkable given that it was a pilot episode for a show that had not yet figured out what it was. But in the background of the school Christmas pageant scene, while Bart is being reprimanded by his teacher and the other students are rehearsing, there is a small detail painted onto a window in the background of the gymnasium. If you pause at exactly the right frame, you can make out what appears to be a drawing of Bart Simpson himself, rendered in crayon, tacked to the classroom wall. The drawing is not referenced. No character points at it. It exists purely as a piece of decoration that the animators added to make the classroom feel lived in and real. What makes this interesting is not the drawing itself, but what it represents. The animators, from the very first episode, were already thinking about the world of Springfield as a place that had texture beyond what the camera was directly looking at. They were populating the background with details that the story did not require. They were building a world, not just illustrating a script, and that impulse, the impulse to make the background as rich and detailed as the foreground, is the engine that drives every single thing we are going to talk about in this video. The show hid things because the people making it cared about the world they were building, and everything flows from that. Easter Egg 2. The number one on the billboard. There is a recurring visual joke in The Simpsons that most viewers absorb without consciously registering it. Across dozens of episodes, spread across the first several seasons, there is a billboard visible on the highway just outside Springfield. The billboard changes its message periodically, and the messages themselves are jokes, but they are written in a font small enough and placed far enough in the background that many viewers simply register the billboard as background furniture and move on. One of the earliest versions of the billboard reads something to the effect of Springfield, a city that needs no introduction, which is funny in a dry, understated way. But the joke is actually layered, because the billboard is visible in multiple episodes where Springfield is demonstrably in the process of destroying itself through some civic crisis or another. In one episode where the billboard appears, the town is dealing with a garbage strike. In another, a municipal scandal has just been uncovered. The billboard's cheerful self-promotion sits against a backdrop of visible civic dysfunction, and the contrast is the joke. This kind of background joke, what comedy writers sometimes call a runner in the scenery, requires viewers to be paying attention to the wrong part of the frame at the right moment. Most people never catch it on a first viewing. Some never catch it at all. But once you know it is there, once you start watching the backgrounds of exterior Springfield shots for the billboard, you start catching new iterations you had never noticed, and the joke rewards repeated viewings in a way that almost nothing else in the show does. The writers knew that some viewers would catch it immediately and some never would, and they put it there for both groups simultaneously. For the people who caught it, the payoff was immediate. For the people who did not, the joke still quietly contributed to the texture of Springfield as a place that takes itself very seriously despite constantly providing evidence that it should not. Easter egg 3. The background chalkboard in Springfield Elementary. Long before the opening title sequence chalkboard gag became one of the most anticipated parts of every episode, there were smaller, quieter chalkboard jokes hidden inside the episodes themselves. Springfield Elementary has classrooms. Those classrooms have chalkboards, and the animators, being the kind of people who could not leave a chalkboard blank, filled them with material. In several early season episodes, if you look at the chalkboard behind Mrs. Krabappel during her classroom scenes, you can find arithmetic problems written there that do not actually add up. The sums are wrong. The equations are incorrect. The math on the chalkboard in Bart's 4th grade classroom is consistently, demonstrably bad mathematics. This is almost certainly intentional. Springfield Elementary is not depicted as a rigorous academic institution. The school's budget has been repeatedly decimated, its staff is demoralized, and its most famous student is Bart Simpson. The idea that the mathematics on the classroom chalkboard might simply be incorrect is entirely consistent with the world the show is building. But what makes this a genuine Easter egg rather than a continuity error is the consistency of it. If the wrong math appeared in one episode, you might attribute it to an animator making a mistake. When it appears in multiple episodes, always in the background, always just legible enough to be noticed if you are looking for it, it starts to feel deliberate. It starts to feel like a joke about the quality of education in Springfield that the show never needed to make explicit because it was already there in the background of every classroom scene, waiting for the right viewer to notice it. There is a version of this joke that extends beyond the classroom. In later seasons, the show began occasionally placing visible homework assignments in the background of scenes in the Simpson house, pinned to the refrigerator or left on the kitchen table. Some of those assignments have grades on them. Some of those grades are not what you would expect. And the show never draws attention to them. They are just there. Easter egg 4. Krusty's Hebrew lettering. Krusty the Clown is one of the most carefully constructed characters in The Simpsons, and the layers of detail built into his world are consistently more intricate than casual viewers realize. The surface reading of Krusty is straightforward. He is a burned-out children's entertainer who is cynical about his audience, addicted to several vices, and fundamentally unhappy beneath the grease paint. He is also Jewish, a detail the show introduces relatively early and maintains consistently throughout the series. The hidden detail in question appears in the scenes set inside Krusty's dressing room and his studio. If you look carefully at the walls and surfaces in those spaces, you will occasionally find text written in Hebrew. The text is not translated on screen. It is not subtitled. It is simply there, in Hebrew, small enough that most viewers reading left-to-right English will not stop to parse it. But viewers who can read Hebrew have paused on those frames and reported back on what the text says. Some of it is religious in nature. Some of it is surprisingly personal given what the show has established about Krusty's complicated relationship with his faith and his rabbi father. There is at least one instance where the Hebrew text visible in the background of a Krusty scene relates directly to the emotional content of what Krusty is dealing with in that episode, functioning as a kind of visual subtext for viewers who can access it. What the animators were doing here was building a version of Krusty's world that had depth beyond the jokes. They were taking seriously the idea that a Jewish entertainer from a traditional background who had spent his life performing for Gentile children might have a complicated relationship with his heritage, and they were expressing that complication through the objects in his environment, rather than through dialogue. It is exactly the kind of storytelling choice that takes a cartoon character and makes them feel like a real person. Easter egg 5. The recurring license plate joke. Springfield has a lot of cars. In a town the size of Springfield, with its impossible geography and its sprawling suburban neighborhoods and its highway connections to places that are never quite specified, a lot of driving happens. And cars have license plates. And the Simpsons animators, bless them, could not leave a license plate blank. The recurring license plate joke in The Simpsons works on a couple of levels. First, there is the straightforward observation that the license plates visible in the show change states from episode to episode, which is one of the many visual jokes about Springfield's unlocatable geography. In one episode, the plates are from a state that does not exist. In another, they are from a state that is geographically implausible given the other visual information in the episode about where Springfield is. The plates are a running joke about the show's deliberate refusal to commit to a location, but the deeper version of the joke is in specific plates on specific vehicles. Homer's car has had a license plate that, if read carefully, contains a reference to the production number of the episode in which it appears. This is not consistent across every episode, and the show never acknowledges it, but it has appeared often enough that eagle-eyed viewers have compiled lists of episodes where the car's plate correlates to the episode's place in the broadcast order. The animators were essentially leaving a breadcrumb trail through the series for viewers obsessive enough to follow it. The implication of this, if it is intentional, and the evidence suggests it is that the animators were treating the license plate as a kind of running annotation, a small hidden timestamp embedded in the frame, which is either a very labor-intensive joke or a very sophisticated piece of archival humor, depending on how generously you want to read it. Easter egg 6. The Springfield Shopper's secret headlines. The Springfield Shopper is the town's newspaper, and it appears throughout the series as a background prop. Characters hold it, read it, use it to fan themselves, leave it on tables and park benches. It is the kind of prop that in a lesser show would simply be a gray rectangle held at newspaper-shaped dimensions. In The Simpsons, the Springfield Shopper has legible headlines. The headlines visible on the Springfield Shopper across various episodes are not random. They often comment on the events of previous episodes, functioning as a kind of in-world news ticker that acknowledges the show's own continuity in a medium that famously ignores continuity. If Springfield experienced something significant in a recent episode, there is a reasonable chance that the next time a character holds a Springfield Shopper, the headline visible on the front page will reference that event. But the Easter egg is not just in the headlines that track continuity. The Easter egg is in the headlines that exist in the background of scenes where nobody is reading the paper. A Springfield Shopper left on a table in the background of a scene, barely visible, partially obscured by a coffee cup, will have a headline that is legible if you pause and zoom in. And that headline will often be a joke about the episode's main plot, or a commentary on Springfield's civic life, or occasionally a fourth-wall nudge in the direction of the viewer. There is one famous instance where the Springfield Shopper headline, visible in the background of a scene, reads something along the lines of "Local man unaware he is in background," which is a joke that requires the newspaper to exist in the background in order to work, and which rewards exactly the kind of viewer who pauses on background props to read them. Easter egg 7. Walt Whitman's grave. This one comes from the episode Mother Simpson in Season 7, and once you know it is there, it becomes one of the most quietly literary jokes the show has ever attempted. The setup is that Homer, in faking his own death to avoid a Saturday work detail, causes the town's records to show him as deceased. Marge sends him to the Hall of Records to correct the error, and while he is there, Homer discovers that according to the official municipal documentation, his mother is alive. She never died. The joke that follows is that Abe Simpson, trying to protect the secret of why Mona left, told young Homer that his mother was dead and showed him a grave as proof. The grave he showed Homer was not Mona's grave. It was the grave of Walt Whitman, the poet. Now, the show presents this primarily as a gag. The absurdity of a grieving father trying to comfort his son about his mother's death by pointing at the grave of one of the most famous American poets of the 19th century is a very specific kind of absurd, and the episode gets a laugh out of it. But the hidden layer is in who Whitman was and what he wrote. Walt Whitman wrote about America, about its complexity and its contradictions, and its capacity for both greatness and self-deception. He wrote about ordinary people and the dignity of ordinary lives. He wrote, in Song of Myself, about the self as something larger than its individual components, something that persists and recurs. And the show placed his grave in a story about a woman who went underground to fight against institutional power, whose sacrifice was hidden from the person who most needed to understand it, and whose absence shaped a man's entire personality. That is not an accident. The writers chose Whitman specifically, and the choice rewards the viewer who knows enough about Whitman to feel the resonance. Easter egg 8. The 7-11 Quick E-Mart Convergence. The Quick E-Mart is one of the most recognizable fictional locations in television history. It is the store where Apu Nahasapi Mapedalan works a job that the show depicts with increasingly dark comic energy. A man with a doctorate in computer science spending his career selling expired products to people who have no alternative. The Quick E-Mart has become so culturally embedded that when the Simpsons movie was released in 2007, 11 converted 12 of its real-world stores into actual Quick E-Marts as a promotional tie-in, selling squishies and Buzz Cola and pink donuts. But the Easter egg in question predates the movie by over a decade. In the background of several early Quick E-Mart scenes, the store's product shelves are stocked with items whose brand names are visible if you look closely. The brands are fictional, clearly, but they are consistently fictional. The same fake brand of chips appears in multiple episodes. The same fake brand of laundry detergent shows up on the shelf in the background across several seasons. The animators were building a consistent fictional retail ecosystem inside the Quick E-Mart, one that required remembering what you put on the shelves in the last episode and putting the same thing there again. This level of background continuity is not something the audience would ever consciously notice. It is not something reviewers mentioned at the time, but it is something that would feel subtly wrong if it were absent. The Quick E-Mart would feel less real if its shelves were stocked with different products every week. The consistency is what makes it feel like a place rather than a set. And the consistency was a deliberate choice that required ongoing effort from people working on a show that was producing 22 episodes per season. Easter Egg 9. The Hidden Matt Groening Signature. Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, designed the original characters and the visual language of the show before handing off much of the day-to-day creative work to the writers and producers who built Springfield into what it became. His signature on the show is, obviously, everywhere in a broad sense, but there is a more literal version of his signature hidden in the show itself. Groening has a practice, carried over from his pre-Simpsons career as a cartoonist, of hiding his name in the art he produces. In his comic strip Life in Hell, he embedded small visual signatures into the work regularly. When The Simpsons began, he continued the practice. The most frequently cited instance is on Homer's ear. If you look at Homer's ear from the right angle in early seasons of the show, the shape of the ear and the line of his jawline can be read as a stylized lowercase m, g, the initials of the creator, embedded into the character design itself. This is one of those Easter eggs that sits right at the boundary between deliberate choice and pareidolia, the human tendency to find patterns and faces in random shapes. It is possible to read the ear as simply an ear, but Groening's history of embedding signatures in his work, and the fact that the ear maintains this shape consistently across thousands of frames of animation, suggests that it was at least partially intentional. A creator putting his mark on his creation in the most literal way possible, hiding his initials in the design of the character who would go on to be recognized by billions of people. Easter Egg 10. The couch gag that was a real movie. The couch gag is one of the structural constants of The Simpsons. Every episode begins with the family racing to the couch to watch television, and every episode varies what happens when they get there. The couch gag has been used to experiment, to subvert, to bring in guest animators and outside directors, and occasionally to do something so ambitious that it required more production time than some full episodes. But the hidden detail within the couch gag tradition is this: several couch gags across the show's run are not original to The Simpsons at all. They are references to, or direct visual quotations from, other films and television shows, rendered in Simpsons animation style, without announcement or explanation. One of the most elaborate examples involves a couch gag that directly parodies the opening sequence of 2001, A Space Odyssey, complete with the specific visual composition of the Dawn of Man sequence. The gag uses the Simpson family in the roles of the prehistoric apes, with the couch standing in for the monolith. The joke only fully lands if you know the Kubrick film well enough to recognize the reference frame by frame, but the animators executed it with enough care that even viewers who have never seen 2001 get a version of the joke. The visual absurdity carries the gag. The reference provides the additional layer for people who are watching closely. There are couch gags that reference Fantasia, that reference specific Hitchcock films, that reference foreign art cinema movements, and that reference other animated shows in ways that feel like visual arguments about the history of the medium. The couch gag has functioned across the show's run as a space where the production can be playful and referential, without those references needing to integrate into the episode that follows. Drop a comment below with the time and location you are watching from. And if you are enjoying this, hit subscribe. There are a lot more of these to come, and it helps more than you might think. Section 2. Eggs 1120. We are going to continue moving at this pace, letting each detail breathe for a moment before moving to the next one. The show has been hiding things for 36 years, and there is no need to rush through them. Each one has a story attached to it, a reason why someone chose to put this particular thing in this particular frame, and that story is usually as interesting as the egg itself. Easter egg 11. The Sideshow Bob tattoo. Sideshow Bob is one of the great recurring antagonists in television history. His relationship with Bart Simpson, built on a foundation of attempted murder and elaborate thwarted revenge schemes, has produced some of the most beloved episodes of the show's golden era. But Sideshow Bob is also one of the most carefully detailed characters in the series, and the detail in question is the tattoo on his chest. In the episode where Sideshow Bob's tattoo is first properly visible, it reads Bart, as in, he has Bart's name tattooed on his chest. The episode treats this as a joke about obsession, about the way that a person you hate can end up taking up the same psychic real estate as a person you love. Bob is consumed by his hatred of Bart to the point where he has permanently marked his own body with the name. But the hidden layer is in how the tattoo was animated across subsequent episodes. In some scenes, if you look carefully, the tattoo on Bob's chest is not quite consistent. The font shifts slightly. The placement moves. This is partly the normal inconsistency of hand-drawn animation, where small details change from frame to frame. But several longtime viewers have argued that some of the inconsistencies are deliberate, that the animators were having fun with the tattoo the same way Bob has complicated, evolving feelings about Bart. There is also the matter of what the tattoo means in the context of Bob's ongoing life outside of Springfield. Bob, in episodes that follow him after his escapes from prison, is shown in sophisticated European contexts, attending operas, living in Italian villages, being taken seriously as a cultured and educated man. The Bart tattoo on his chest would be, in those contexts, an extremely awkward thing to explain. The show never addresses this. Bob simply lives with it, which says something about how deeply Bart has gotten under his skin that no amount of European refinement can cover. Easter egg 12. The Treehouse of Horror rules. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the show's annual Halloween specials, and they operate under a different set of rules than the regular episodes. Characters die. Dark things happen. Reality bends in ways that the show would not permit in its regular continuity. This is accepted by viewers as a feature of the specials rather than a violation of the show's universe. But the hidden detail is in how the Treehouse of Horror episodes signal their non-canonical status through visual cues that most viewers absorb without consciously registering. The most consistent of these is a subtle color shift in the opening title sequence when a Treehouse episode airs. The colors are slightly desaturated in certain elements. The Springfield skyline in the background of the opening has been modified with details that would not appear in a regular episode. Clouds have faces. The power plant emits something other than steam. Small, easily missed alterations that the animators place there to tell viewers, before the episode proper begins, that the rules are different tonight. This functions as a visual preamble to the anthology horror structure of the specials themselves. By the time the first segment begins, the animators have already been signaling for 90 seconds that normal narrative gravity has been suspended. It is a very economical piece of visual storytelling. The other hidden detail in the Treehouse of Horror specials is in the transition sequences between segments. In the earliest specials, these transitions are handled by Bart and Lisa sitting in the treehouse, telling each other the stories that make up the episode. As the specials evolved, the framing device changed. But in many of the later specials, the transition sequences contain visual gags that connect the three segments thematically in ways that are not immediately obvious on a first watch. The gag you miss at the end of segment 1 pays off at the start of segment 3, and the connection rewards viewers who are paying attention across the full runtime of the special. Easter egg 13. Principal Skinner's War Photo. Principal Skinner, or rather Armin Tamzarian, is one of the show's most complicated characters from a continuity perspective. We have discussed at length elsewhere the episode that revealed his identity as an imposter. But prior to that reveal, the show spent years building Skinner as a Vietnam veteran whose military experience had fundamentally shaped his personality and his approach to running Springfield Elementary. The hidden detail in question appears in Skinner's office. In several episodes set inside the principal's office, there are photographs on the wall that establish Skinner's military background. These photographs are not examined closely by the show. They appear in the background of scenes focused on other things: disciplinary meetings with Bart, tense conversations with Superintendent Chalmers. But if you freeze on the right frame, the photographs on Skinner's wall are arranged in a specific order, and that order tells a story about a military career that tracks with the biographical details the show establishes for the character. The photographs were placed there by animators who were taking seriously the idea that Skinner's office should feel like the office of a veteran, that the room should reflect the person who occupied it, that even in the background of a joke about Bart getting in trouble again, there should be visual evidence that the man behind the desk had a life and a history outside of the joke. After the Armin Tamzarian reveal, some of those photographs become retroactively strange. If Skinner is not who he said he was, if his military biography is a lie, then the photographs on his wall are either fictional props he placed there to maintain the deception, or evidence that the real Seymour Skinner's history was absorbed so thoroughly by Tamzarian that it became genuinely his own. The show never revisits this. The photographs stay on the wall, and the question of what they mean has no official answer. Easter egg 14. Apu's degree. Apu Nahasapi Mapatilan holds a doctorate in computer science from the Calcutta Institute of Theoretical Metaphysics. This is established in the episode Homer and Apu, which is one of the better episodes of the show's classic period. The episode uses Apu's overqualification for his job as a device to explore the gap between ambition and circumstance, between the life someone was educated for and the life they ended up living. The hidden detail is not in the episode where Apu's degree is revealed. It is in the episodes before that revelation. If you go back and watch early season Quickie Mart scenes after you know that Apu has a doctorate in computer science, the background details of those scenes read differently. There are books on a shelf behind the counter. The books are technical in appearance. In at least one episode, before the degree is established as canonical, the books visible behind Apu are advanced enough in appearance that they would not be out of place in a graduate-level computer science program. The animators were building Apu's biography into the texture of his environment before the show had officially revealed that biography to the audience. They were treating the character as a person with a specific history and education, and they were letting that history leak into the background details of his workplace, trusting that the relationship between those background details and the character's eventual revealed backstory would reward the observant viewer. This is the kind of long-game visual storytelling that requires genuine commitment from a large team working on a weekly production schedule. It would have been enormously easier to simply have generic books on the shelf behind Apu. The choice to put specific-looking technical books there in multiple episodes before the character's academic background was revealed is a choice that speaks to how seriously the show's production team took the world they were building. Easter egg 15. The fish in the fish tank. There is a fish tank in the waiting room of Dr. Hibbert's medical office. This is a perfectly ordinary detail. Doctors' offices often have fish tanks, and the fish tank in Dr. Hibbert's office follows the visual grammar of real medical waiting rooms closely enough that most viewers register it as background texture and move on. But the fish in the fish tank are not always the same fish. Across multiple episodes set in Dr. Hibbert's waiting room, the fish in the tank change. New species appear. Fish that were present in one episode are absent in the next. This is, again, the kind of detail that could be simple continuity error, the kind of thing that happens when different animators work on different episodes, and nobody has a reference sheet for exactly which fish were in the background of a waiting room scene 6 months ago, except for one detail that tips this from probable error into possible joke. In one episode, the fish tank in Dr. Hibbert's waiting room contains a three-eyed fish, a fish that looks distinctly like it might be a relative of Blinky, the famous mutant from the river near the nuclear power plant. It is in the background. Nobody comments on it. Dr. Hibbert does not appear to notice or care, but the fish is there, in the waiting room of a medical doctor, with 3 eyes, and the implication is dark if you follow it. If the radiation from the nuclear power plant has produced 3-eyed fish in the local water supply, And if those fish end up in a decorative tank in the waiting room of the town's primary physician, then either Dr. Hibbert is unaware of where his fish came from, or he is aware and finds it unremarkable. Neither reading is particularly reassuring about the state of medical oversight in Springfield. Easter egg 16. The Legitimate Businessmen's Social Club. The Springfield Mafia is a recurring presence in the show's universe, and Fat Tony is one of the show's great supporting characters, a gangster who operates with a philosophical resignation about his profession and a refined appreciation for certain aesthetic pleasures. The mob's organizational infrastructure in Springfield has been depicted across dozens of episodes, and it is mostly played for laughs. But hidden in the background of episodes that involve the Springfield organized crime scene, there is a consistent visual motif. The various locations where Fat Tony and his associates conduct business, restaurants, social clubs, back rooms, always have the same painting on the wall. It is a landscape painting, a pastoral scene with rolling hills and a farmhouse in the distance. The kind of painting you would find in an Italian-American grandmother's dining room. The kind of painting that says we come from somewhere specific, somewhere old, somewhere where the hills look like that. The painting has appeared in Fat Tony's establishments across episodes from multiple different seasons. It is not always foregrounded. It is often partially visible behind characters' heads, or obscured by set dressing, but it is consistently there, functioning as a kind of visual signature for the mob's presence in Springfield. The joke underneath the joke is that this is a sophisticated character detail embedded in a setting that the show is treating as a comedy backdrop. The painting says something real about who these characters are and where they imagine themselves to have come from, and the show never points at it. It just keeps appearing in the background, a piece of visual biography for characters who will never be given the screen time to express their own histories in dialogue. Easter egg 17. The Evergreen Terrace Neighbors. The Simpson family lives at 742 Evergreen Terrace. This address has become one of the most famous fictional addresses in American culture. But the hidden detail is not in the address itself. It is in the other houses on Evergreen Terrace, which have been depicted enough times across the show's run that attentive viewers have been able to construct a fairly detailed picture of the neighborhood's social geography. The Flanders house, next door to the Simpsons, is consistently tidier and better maintained than the Simpson house. This is obvious and intentional. But less obvious is the detail that the Flanders house's exterior has been slowly updated across the show's run in ways that track Ned's life events. After Maud's death, there are subtle differences in how the Flanders house is depicted in exterior shots. Small things, the absence of certain decorative elements that had been there before, a change in how the porch furniture is arranged. The animators were using the exterior of the house to track the internal emotional state of the man who lived in it, without ever drawing attention to the fact that they were doing so. Further down Evergreen Terrace, the houses belonging to other recurring neighbors have their own hidden biographies embedded in their exteriors. The maintenance levels of different houses track the economic situations of their occupants in ways that the show establishes elsewhere through dialogue. It is a consistent system. The neighborhood as a whole tells a story about its residents through visual detail that the camera almost never lingers on. Easter egg 18. Kang and Kodos' consistent return. Kang and Kodos are the show's alien characters, a pair of tentacled extraterrestrials from the planet Rigel 7 who appear primarily in the Treehouse of Horror specials. They are one of the show's longest-running background elements, a pair of characters who were introduced early and have been brought back with remarkable consistency across nearly every Halloween special the show has produced. The hidden detail is in the nature of their appearances. Kang and Kodos do not always appear prominently in the Treehouse of Horror episodes. Sometimes they have significant roles in one of the 3 segments, but sometimes they appear only in a single frame, in the background of a scene that is focused on something else entirely, a crowd shot, a skyline view, a brief exterior establishing shot. They are there, usually doing something that references their previous appearances, visible for perhaps half a second before the scene moves on. This consistent background presence across decades of episodes requires the production team to remember, every Halloween season, to find a place for Kang and Kodos even in episodes where the plot has no natural place for them. It is a deliberate act of institutional memory and care for a running joke that would have been completely unremarkable to retire at any point after the first few specials. The fact that the show keeps finding corners to hide them in, keeps placing them in crowd shots and background windows, suggests that someone in the production chain considers their consistent presence important enough to actively maintain. The running count of Kang and Kodos appearances, including their background micro-appearances, is one of the more elaborate pieces of Simpsons fan scholarship, and the number is significantly higher than most people would estimate. Easter egg 19. The car dealership sign. Springfield has a car dealership. It appears in the background of several episodes, and like most background businesses in Springfield, it has a name. The name is visible on the dealership's sign if you pause at the right moment, and the name changes between episodes. This is initially readable as a continuity error. Car dealerships do not change their names between weeks in the real world, but the specific names the dealership takes across its various appearances suggest that the name changes are intentional because the names are all puns on the same theme, automotive industry jokes that require knowledge of how car dealerships and auto financing actually work. The progression of names, if you track them across episodes, tells a story about a dealership that is cycling through business models, probably in the wake of financial difficulties. Each new name suggests a slightly different value proposition, a slightly different pitch to potential customers, as if the dealership is trying to rebrand its way out of whatever problem its previous iteration was in. The joke is in the accumulation, in the pattern that emerges when you know to look for it, but no single episode makes the joke explicit. You have to have seen enough of the show and paused on enough background signs to understand that the dealership's identity is itself the running gag. Easter egg 20. The recurring clock at Moe's Tavern has a clock on the wall. This is a visual fact established early in the show's run and maintained consistently enough that it has become part of the set's visual identity. But the hidden detail is in what time the clock shows. In a significant number of episodes set in Moe's Tavern, the clock on the wall shows the same time regardless of what time of day the scene is supposed to be set. The time on the clock suggests that either the clock has stopped at a specific moment in the past, or that time at Moe's operates on different rules than time in the rest of Springfield. Both of these readings are consistent with the emotional function of the tavern in the show's universe. Moe's is the place characters go when they want to escape from the forward movement of their lives. Homer goes there to be somewhere time has no particular urgency. The stopped clock is a visual expression of that. The specific time the clock shows has been the subject of fan debate. Some viewers believe it stopped at the time of a significant event in Moe's fictional history, something that happened before the show began and that shaped the tavern into what it is. There is no canonical evidence to support any specific reading, but the consistency of the frozen clock across episodes that span years of production in a show that changes enormous amounts of background detail between episodes suggests that the frozen clock is deliberate and that its time was chosen with some intention. Section 3. Eggs 21:30. There is a rhythm to watching a show this old. You start to feel the texture of it. The way certain background details become familiar without ever being noticed consciously. The way the sound of a particular location, the jukebox at Moe's or the school bell at Springfield Elementary, creates a Pavlovian response in longtime viewers. These sounds are not Easter eggs in the traditional sense, but the relationship between sound design and visual detail in The Simpsons is itself a hidden layer of the show's construction, and it is worth holding on to as we continue. Easter egg 21. Homer's tie and what it signals. Homer Simpson wears the same outfit in essentially every episode. Blue pants, white shirt, tie that appears to be some shade of gray or blue, depending on the episode and the coloring. This is standard cartoon shorthand. The outfit is the character is the outfit, and consistency of dress means consistency of identity. But the tie actually does change. Not dramatically, not in ways that most viewers would notice without being specifically alert to it. But the shade of Homer's tie, the exact hue it is colored in any given episode, varies in ways that careful viewers have correlated with the emotional register of the episode in question. In episodes that deal with Homer's professional anxieties or his relationships at the power plant, the tie tends toward gray. In episodes centered on his home life and his relationships with his family, the tie has a warmer coloring. This is either a deliberate coloring choice by the show's art direction team, or it is the natural result of different colorists working on different episodes and applying their own instincts to a design that was never exactly specified down to the precise hex value of the tie. The question of whether this is intentional design or happy accident has never been officially resolved. But the correlation is real enough that it has been documented by fans who went back and matched episodes to tie colors, and it is consistent enough across a large sample of episodes to be interesting regardless of whether a human being chose it deliberately. Easter egg 22. The Simpsons universe branding. Springfield has a local television station called Channel 6, which is home to the Krusty the Clown Show and several other locally produced programs. The station's branding, its on-air graphics, its logo, its visual identity, has been depicted in enough episodes that it has a consistent internal design language. But the hidden detail is in the commercials that appear within the Krusty Show during episodes where we are watching the show within the show. Some of those commercials advertise products that do not have any other function in the episode. They are not plot relevant. They appear on screen for 3 or 4 seconds as part of the texture of a television broadcast, and then they are gone. But those commercials have been animated with enough care that their products have visible brand identities, with logos and taglines that are legible on freeze frame. Some of those in-world commercials advertise products that appear elsewhere in the Springfield universe. Not prominently, not in ways that the show explicitly connects, but a product visible in a Krusty Show commercial in Season 4 might appear on a shelf in the Quick E-Mart in Season 6 without any acknowledgement that the same product exists in both locations. The Springfield consumer economy has its own internal consistency, built out across dozens of small background details that individually mean nothing but collectively suggest a fully realized world. Easter egg 23. The writers' names as street names. Springfield's street geography has been depicted enough times that viewers with a strong enough familiarity with the show's visual language can construct a rough mental map of how the town is laid out. Evergreen Terrace connects to a larger road. That road leads toward downtown. Downtown has streets with names. Some of those street names are the names of the Simpsons writing staff. Not all of them, not consistently, but in a number of episodes where a street sign is clearly legible in the background of a scene, the name on the sign belongs to someone who wrote or produced episodes of The Simpsons. The show has been quietly honoring its writers by naming Springfield's geography after them, in the background of scenes, in text too small for most viewers to read, without pausing. This tradition appears to have begun in the earlier seasons and continued, with varying regularity, throughout the show's run. It means that if you have watched enough of the show to be able to match names to episodes, and if you pause on enough street signs in the background of outdoor scenes, you can identify which neighborhoods of Springfield were animated during which eras of the show's production history based purely on the names of the streets in the background. It is urban cartography as institutional history, the story of who was working on the show at any given moment, encoded into the geography of the fictional town they were building together. Easter egg 24. Maggie's price at the supermarket. This one is famous enough that it might already be known to many viewers, but it belongs in this list because the detail it contains has multiple layers that are often discussed only superficially. In the title sequence of The Simpsons, specifically during the supermarket checkout scene where Marge is purchasing groceries with Maggie, the checkout display briefly shows the total of the grocery purchase as Marge runs items across the scanner. And then Maggie is added to the total as a product being purchased, and the price goes up. Maggie scans as a grocery item. The number that appears on the display is $847.63. The surface joke is that Maggie is being rung up like a product, which is absurdist enough to function as a quick gag. But the number $847.63 is not random. It was, at the time the title sequence was designed, the United States Department of Agriculture's estimate of the monthly cost of raising an infant in an American middle-class household. The show embedded the real cost of child rearing into a visual gag that runs for about 3 seconds in the opening title sequence of every single episode, including in reruns that aired decades after the original sequence was produced. The deeper layer is what happens when that number is adjusted for inflation across the show's 3-6-year run. The actual cost of raising a child in America has increased significantly since the original estimate was made, but the number in the title sequence never updates. Maggie stays at $847.63, which is either a joke about the show's floating timeline and its refusal to acknowledge the passage of time, or a quiet commentary on the fact that cultural conversations about the cost of raising children tend to anchor to old estimates long after those estimates have become obsolete. Easter egg 25. The Itchy and Scratchy Color Palette. Itchy and Scratchy is the violent cartoon within the cartoon that Bart and Lisa watch throughout the series. It functions as a satire of cartoons like Tom and Jerry, a meditation on animated violence and the audiences who consume it, and a vehicle for some of the show's most inventive visual comedy. The Itchy and Scratchy segments are among the most carefully produced parts of the show. The hidden detail is in the color palette used in Itchy and Scratchy segments versus the color palette used in the main Simpsons episodes. The Itchy and Scratchy segments are colored slightly differently from the rest of the show. The colors are more saturated, more primary, more reminiscent of the Technicolor aesthetic of classic mid-century American cartoons. The color grading of the segments within the segment is distinct from the color grading of the scenes in which Bart and Lisa watch those segments. This creates a visual layering effect, where you are watching a family colored in one palette, watching a cartoon colored in a different palette. The distinction is subtle enough that most viewers register it without consciously identifying it, but it does real work in the viewing experience. It signals the boundaries between the show's world and the world within the show. It reinforces the idea that what Bart and Lisa are watching is a different kind of artifice from the artifice of The Simpsons itself, which is a conceptually interesting position for a cartoon to put itself in. The color palette shift has remained consistent across every Itchy and Scratchy segment in the show's history, maintained by colorists working on episodes decades apart. It is the kind of visual consistency that requires institutional memory and ongoing intentional effort. Easter egg 26. Nelson's house. Nelson Muntz is one of the show's great supporting characters, a bully with a genuinely difficult home life who has been given enough depth over the course of the series to function as something more than a comic antagonist. The famous Nelson laugh, the pointed finger, the schadenfreude directed at whoever has just suffered misfortune, these are his public face. His home life is the private face. The Nelson family home has been depicted in enough episodes to establish a visual grammar for what poverty and domestic instability look like in Springfield's animation vocabulary. The house is run down in ways that track the family's economic circumstances. But the hidden detail is in the interior, specifically in the glimpses we get of Nelson's room and what it contains. Nelson's room has books in it, not textbooks, not assigned reading, but books. Books that suggest a kid who reads when nobody is watching, who has built an inner life out of library visits that his exterior presentation would never suggest. The books are not always legible on screen. They are often just rectangular shapes on a shelf in the background. But their presence is consistent across multiple episodes where we see Nelson's bedroom, and they are present in ways that track with the show's occasional revelations that Nelson is more intelligent and more emotionally complex than his bully archetype would suggest. It is a very quiet piece of character work, conducted entirely through background props, in a show that could easily have made Nelson's room simply empty. Easter egg 27. The numbers on Moe's beer taps. Moe's Tavern has beer taps. This is the core of the establishment's business, the dispensing of beer to the sad and the regular and the occasionally desperate patrons who occupy its bar stools night after night. The beer taps are visible in essentially every scene set at the bar, and they are close enough to the camera in many of those scenes to be examined if you know to look. The brand names on the beer taps change between episodes. This is another element that could be simple continuity inconsistency, and some of it probably is. But a subset of the beer tap names visible across episodes have been identified by fans as references to real craft breweries, beer styles, or alcohol brands that were specifically meaningful to the writers who worked on the episodes in question. The taps at Moe's have functioned intermittently as a way for writers to put small personal shoutouts into the background of their episodes. The more interesting hidden detail, though, is in the prices on the chalkboard behind the bar. Moe's drink prices have been legible in background shots across multiple episodes, and the prices do not follow any internal economic logic. The pricing structure at Moe's appears to have been set by someone who had strong opinions about the relative value of different alcoholic beverages that are not fully consistent with market rates. The beer is cheap. The spirits are cheaper than they should be. There is at least one episode where the price of Duff beer at Moe's is so low that it implies Moe's business model is essentially charity which is consistent with the show's overall depiction of Moe as a man who is running a bar more for the human contact than for profit. Easter egg 28. Lisa's books. Lisa Simpson is a reader. She has been established as such from the earliest episodes. She is the kind of child who carries books voluntarily, who goes to the library for pleasure rather than obligation, who reads things that are years or decades above her age level, because the books available at her own level no longer challenge her. The hidden detail is in which books are depicted in Lisa's room and in her hands across the show's run. The books are not always legible. They are often depicted as simply books, rectangular objects without distinguishable covers. But in a significant number of episodes, the titles on the spines of books visible in Lisa's room or in her hands during reading scenes are legible on freeze frame. And the titles form a reading list that is, taken as a whole, a remarkably sophisticated biography of a precocious child's intellectual development. The books visible in Lisa's possession across the show's run span multiple disciplines: literature, science, philosophy, political theory, environmental writing, music theory. The list, if you compile it from freeze frames across multiple seasons, reflects a developing mind moving through fields of inquiry in a sequence that feels organic rather than random. The Lisa, who is reading a particular kind of book in Season 4, is a different intellectual stage from the Lisa visible in Season 10, and the books visible in those scenes track that development. This is either a deliberate attempt by the show's writers to build a coherent intellectual biography for Lisa through background props, or it is the result of multiple writers independently making specific choices about what book Lisa would plausibly be reading, and those choices happening to be internally consistent. Both readings require a genuine level of care about who Lisa is as a character. Easter egg 29. The power plant's CCTV. The Springfield nuclear power plant has security cameras. This is depicted in episodes set inside the facility, where we occasionally get shots from a camera perspective looking down at the workspace from a corner of the ceiling. The security cameras are part of the set dressing that makes the plant feel like an industrial facility rather than just a backdrop. But in at least one episode, if you look carefully at the monitors visible in a security booth in the background of a scene, those monitors are showing footage of areas of the plant that are relevant to the episode's plot. The security footage being monitored in the background of the scene contains information that, if any of the characters in the scene were paying attention to the background monitors, would change the outcome of the episode. This is a beautifully constructed joke about surveillance capitalism, about the gap between the infrastructure designed to provide oversight and the human tendency to not actually look at the information that infrastructure is collecting. The security cameras are on. The monitors are showing footage. Nobody is watching the monitors. And the thing that would resolve the episode's central conflict is visible on screens that the characters have simply stopped paying attention to. It is the most economical possible visual commentary on one of the most persistent failures of corporate risk management, and it is delivered entirely in the background of a scene while the characters are talking about something else. Easter egg 30. Patty and Selma's television watching. Patty and Selma Bouvier, Marge's sisters, are the show's great pessimists. Their lives have calcified around a particular routine involving MacGyver reruns, cigarettes, and the satisfaction of finding fault with Homer. They are, in their way, a very precisely observed portrait of what can happen to human beings when they stop expecting their circumstances to change. The hidden detail is in what they are watching on television in the background of scenes set in their apartment. The television is almost always on when we are in Patty and Selma's space. This is consistent with their characterization as people who fill their lives with other people's stories because their own lives feel like they have already been fully explored and found limited. But the specific programs visible on their television across multiple episodes are not random. They are a carefully curated selection of programming that is consistent with everything the show has established about the sisters' interests, their cultural reference points, their aesthetic preferences, and their emotional needs. The television they watch in the background of scenes tells you something specific about who they are, something that supplements the characterization established through dialogue and plot. And in at least one episode, the program visible on the television in the background of a Patty and Selma scene is directly relevant to the episode's emotional content in a way that functions as a parallel commentary. The show they are watching is doing something tonally similar to what the main episode is doing, And the juxtaposition between the background viewing material and the main narrative creates a quiet visual rhyme that the show never draws attention to. Section 4. Eggs 3140. We are a third of the way through. The pace of this is working exactly as it should. Each egg reveals something about how the show was made, who made it, and what they cared about. The picture that emerges is of a production that took its fictional world seriously even while making jokes about it, perhaps especially while making jokes about it. Easter egg 31. The Simpsons versus other cartoons. The Simpsons exists within a universe that contains other animated programs. This is established in episodes where characters watch television, and the programs they watch include references to other cartoons, both real and fictional. The Itchy and Scratchy Show is the most prominent of these fictional programs. But Springfield's children also watch other cartoons that are depicted with varying degrees of visual specificity. The hidden detail is in how the other animated programs visible in the background of television screens in the Simpson household are designed. The art style of these fictional cartoons visible in the background of episodes is distinct from both the main Simpsons animation style and the Itchy and Scratchy style. Each fictional cartoon has its own visual identity, and those identities are not random. They are parodies of specific real animation styles, identifiable to viewers with knowledge of animation history. One fictional background cartoon appears to be a parody of the limited animation style associated with television cartoons from the 1960s. Another appears to be a parody of the super flat, hyper-saturated style of certain Japanese animation that was beginning to influence American cartoon design during the show's golden era. A third appears to be a parody of the action-oriented character design of certain superhero cartoons. The show was, in these background television screens, making an argument about the landscape of animation at the moment of the show's production. It was situating itself within a tradition by parodying that tradition's other inhabitants, and it was doing so in the background of scenes while its characters were dealing with something entirely unrelated to cartoon theory. Easter egg 32. The real Shelbyville. Springfield has a rival town called Shelbyville. The rivalry is mostly played for laughs, a parody of the kind of small-town civic competition that exists between neighboring communities. Shelbyville has its own version of everything Springfield has, and Springfield people are reflexively dismissive of Shelbyville in ways that track with the logic of local pride. The hidden detail is that Shelbyville, in the background of the episodes that depict it, is consistently shown as being slightly more functional than Springfield. The streets are marginally cleaner. The public buildings are in marginally better repair. The Shelbyville citizens visible in crowd shots are slightly less visually chaotic than their Springfield counterparts. This is a very quiet joke about the logic of civic rivalry. Springfield's contempt for Shelbyville exists in inverse proportion to Shelbyville's objective competence relative to Springfield. The show is suggesting, in the background of the jokes about town rivalry, that Springfield's attitude toward Shelbyville is a defensive mechanism. The mockery is a way of not having to acknowledge that the thing you are mocking is doing several things better than you are. It is also consistent with the radiation theory, if you want to bring that framework to bear. Shelbyville is far enough from the nuclear power plant that its residents have not been affected in the same ways. Their relative physical and civic normality is a product of their distance from the contamination zone. The town rivalry, in this reading, is between people who have been mutated and a town that has not. Easter egg 33. The Simpsons furniture. The furniture in the Simpson house is one of the most carefully maintained background details in the entire series. The specific couch in the living room, the kitchen table, the chairs, the positions of certain decorative objects on the walls, these have been kept remarkably consistent across 36 years of production, even as the animation style has evolved and the visual quality of the show has changed dramatically. The hidden detail is in the small alterations to the furniture arrangement that appear in specific episodes and track with the emotional content of those episodes. In episodes centered on domestic tension, the living room furniture is sometimes subtly rearranged in ways that suggest a barrier between the couch where Homer sits and the other areas of the room. In episodes where the family is united around a common purpose, the furniture feels slightly more open, less barricading. This is the kind of detail that no individual viewer would notice consciously. But the cumulative effect of these subtle spatial adjustments is that The Simpsons' living room feels like a space that responds to the emotional temperature of the family that inhabits it, rather than a static set where characters stand in front of a fixed backdrop. The room has moods, and those moods are communicated through furniture arrangement in a medium where most viewers assume the furniture stays put. Easter egg 34. Sideshow Mel's overlooked complexity. Sideshow Mel is the trombone-playing sidekick who replaced Sideshow Bob after Bob's arrest for framing Krusty. He has a bone through his hair, he speaks in a theatrical baritone, and he is mostly used as a visual and comedic prop in Krusty show scenes. He is, on the surface, one of the least developed recurring characters in the show. But in the background of scenes that include Sideshow Mel, if you watch his reactions to the events happening around him rather than watching the characters the scene is centered on, something interesting emerges. Sideshow Mel consistently reacts to things with a level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness that his surface characterization does not suggest. His facial expressions in crowd shots and background positions are more nuanced than his dialogue would indicate. He appears, in these unguarded background moments, to be a person who understands exactly what is happening around him and finds much of it darkly absurd. This is either a deliberate choice by the animators responsible for Mel in crowd shots, or it is a coincidence of facial expression work that happened to give the character more depth than his lines support. But if it is deliberate, then Sideshow Mel's apparent shallowness is a performance, and the real Sideshow Mel is watching Springfield's dysfunction with the same philosophical resignation that characterizes many of the show's best secondary characters. Easter egg 35. The Duff Beer Physics. Duff Beer is Springfield's dominant beer brand, to an extent that borders on monopoly. Homer drinks Duff. The bars serve Duff. The refrigerators in Springfield homes contain Duff. The cultural footprint of Duff in Springfield's fictional economy is enormous, and the show has occasionally addressed this directly in episodes about the beer's marketing and the corporate structure behind it. The hidden detail is in the physics of how Duff beer behaves in the background of scenes where characters are consuming it. Duff does not foam the way real beer foams. It carbonates at a rate that does not correspond to the temperature of the environments in which it is consumed. When Homer opens a Duff in a summer scene, the behavior of the liquid is different from when he opens one in a winter scene, but the differences do not track with the thermodynamic reality of how carbonation behaves. This sounds like a mundane animation inconsistency. But the specific ways in which Duff Beer's physical behavior is wrong across different episodes have been compiled by fans with a background in chemistry, and the errors are not random. The beer behaves in ways that are consistently more appealing than real beer would behave. It foams perfectly when it should. It sits flat in the glass when foam would be inconvenient for the visual composition of the shot. The beer has been animated to look appetizing rather than realistic, and the specific choices made in service of that appetizing appearance are consistent across the show's run in ways that suggest a deliberate aesthetic policy around how Duff beer is depicted. Easter egg 36. Homer's workstation at the power plant. Homer's workstation in Sector 7G is one of the show's iconic locations. The desk, the chair, the donut box, the radiation warning lights that Homer consistently ignores, these are the visual vocabulary of Homer's professional life. The station has been depicted in hundreds of episodes across the show's run. The hidden detail is in the specific configuration of controls at Homer's workstation, which has been examined by viewers with technical knowledge of actual nuclear power plant control interfaces. The controls at Homer's station, while clearly designed for visual comedy rather than technical accuracy, are not entirely random in their design. Several of the buttons and dials at Homer's station correspond, in a loose and exaggerated way, to the general categories of controls found at real nuclear power plant operator stations. The show appears to have done some research into what a real nuclear power plant control station looks like before designing Homer's, and then exaggerated and comedified what it found. The result is a workstation that is clearly absurd but gestures toward reality in ways that make the humor more grounded. The underlying real thing is visible beneath the cartoon, which makes the comedy around Homer's incompetence at this station land slightly harder than it would if the station were purely invented. The safety warning signs at Homer's station are also worth examining. They are legible in background shots, and they are, consistently, more alarming than any safety warning you would find in a real workplace. The specific language of the warnings has been crafted to be simultaneously funny and genuinely sobering. Easter egg 37. The burning building in Season 1. In the background of an early season episode, during a scene set in a suburban Springfield neighborhood, There is a building on fire in the background. It is not commented on by any character. It is not related to the episode's plot. It simply burns in the background, while the characters in the foreground deal with something entirely unrelated. This is one of the show's earliest uses of the background catastrophe joke, which would become a recurring visual motif. The idea that Springfield is a place where disaster happens constantly, where buildings catch fire and accidents occur and civic mayhem unfolds, and that the residents of Springfield are so accustomed to this baseline level of chaos that they no longer find it worth commenting on, is one of the show's most consistent thematic underpinnings. The burning building in the background of that early scene is remarkable because it appears before the show had fully established this motif. It is almost experimental, a trial run for a joke that the show would go on to perfect over decades. The writers were testing whether viewers would notice the background, whether the incongruity of a burning building being ignored would land as comedy, and the answer was clearly yes, because the motif continued. Finding that specific episode and that specific frame where the first background disaster appears is the kind of archaeological work that Simpsons fandom does better than almost any other fan community. Easter egg 38. The Gracie Films, logo and sound. Every episode of The Simpsons ends with the Gracie Films production logo, a brief card showing the company name and its logo. This is standard television practice, the last beat of an episode before it transitions to whatever comes next. But the Gracie Films logo has a hidden audio joke that most viewers absorb, so automatically they no longer consciously register it. The sound effect that accompanies the Gracie Films card, a woman's voice saying a single word, was recorded once and has played unchanged beneath every single Gracie Films card in the show's history. The joke is that it plays identically every time, which is only funny once you have heard it enough times that you begin to notice its perfect consistency. The joke rewards the viewer who has seen enough episodes to have the sound effect become involuntary background noise and then suddenly hears it consciously for the first time in years. There is a version of the Gracie Films card where the sound effect has been altered for a specific Treehouse of Horror episode. The alteration is small, a modification of the tone and the context in which the sound is presented. Finding which specific Halloween special features the altered Gracie Films sound is a minor piece of Simpsons knowledge that fans trade the way other people trade trivia about sports statistics. Easter egg 39. Marge's grocery list. Marge Simpson is the household's primary grocery shopper. This is established early and maintained consistently throughout the series. The supermarket is one of Marge's recurring settings, and her relationship with the grocery store, with coupons, with the weekly budget, is part of the characterization of her as the person who keeps the family's practical life functional. In several episodes where Marge is shown consulting a grocery list, the list is legible if you pause on the right frame. The items on the list are not always relevant to the episode's plot. Sometimes they are just grocery items, the specific mundane items a family of 5 in a mid-sized American town would purchase in a given week. But the specific items on the list, when you compile them across multiple episodes, form a picture of the Simpson family's eating habits that is remarkably consistent with what the show has established about each character's preferences. Homer's dietary preferences are represented on the list in ways that track with his on-screen behavior. Lisa's vegetarianism, once it is established in the show's continuity, changes the list in ways that are visible on freeze frame. The grocery list is a living document of the Simpson family's evolving dietary needs, maintained in the background of kitchen scenes across a show that is not famous for this kind of internal continuity. Easter egg 40. The Simpsons movie foreshadowing. The Simpsons movie, released in 2007, represented the culmination of nearly 20 years of the show's fictional world building. The movie introduced the lake, the dome, the EPA, and the idea of Springfield as a federally designated environmental hazard. These plot points felt like the natural escalation of things the show had been building toward. But the hidden detail is how extensively the movie's major plot points were foreshadowed in episodes from years earlier. The lake, which plays a central role in the movie's environmental crisis plot, is visible in the background of several episodes from early seasons, shown in states of progressive pollution that track with the timeline of contamination the movie depicts. The specific color of the lake water in those background shots changes across seasons in a way that, viewed in retrospect, tells the story of an environmental crisis building toward the catastrophe the movie depicts. This is either brilliant long-game storytelling, with the show's production team planning the movie's premise far enough in advance to begin seeding visual evidence of it years before the film was produced, or it is a retcon, a recontextualization of earlier background details that were not originally intended as foreshadowing, but which were absorbed into the movie's logic. Both readings are interesting. The first suggests an almost improbable level of production planning. The second suggests something about how creative works absorb their own history and give that history meaning in retrospect. Section 5. Eggs 4150. The show's relationship with time is one of its most distinctive features. Not just the floating timeline, not just the fact that nobody ages, but the way the show moves through real cultural time while its characters remain frozen. Easter eggs are, in a sense, the show's way of acknowledging the passage of time that its characters cannot. Hidden dates, references to things that were current when an episode was made and have since become history, the production fingerprints of a specific moment in television history embedded in the frame like insects in amber. Easter egg 41. The 1984 reference. George Orwell's novel 1984 is one of the most referenced works of literature in the English language, and The Simpsons, being a show made by people with strong literary inclinations, has visited the novel's world several times. But beyond the explicit references, there are visual details in the show that quote the novel's imagery without ever naming it. In episodes depicting Springfield's civic infrastructure, its government buildings, its police department, its public spaces, there are occasional visual details that rhyme with the surveillance architecture Orwell described. Security cameras placed in positions that suggest total coverage, government signage using language that is benevolent in tone and ambiguous in meaning, public address systems visible in crowd shots, systems that could as easily be used to broadcast instructions as to amplify celebration. The show never makes these details explicit. It never says, "This is an Orwell reference. Look at this surveillance camera." The details are simply there, consistent with both the show's own depictions of Springfield's civic life and with the visual grammar of a certain kind of dystopian fiction. Viewers who know the source material feel the resonance. Viewers who do not see background infrastructure. Both readings are available simultaneously. Easter egg 42. The Springfield Observatory. Springfield has an observatory. This is established in episodes that deal with astronomy or with Springfield's educational institutions, and the observatory's exterior is visible in establishing shots in a handful of episodes. It is not one of the town's most prominently featured locations. But the observatory's telescope, in episodes where it is visible, is pointing at different celestial objects across different appearances. The pointing of an observatory telescope is something most viewers would not think to notice. Telescopes are pointed at things. That is what they are for. The specific angle and orientation of the telescope in Springfield's observatory seems like exactly the kind of detail nobody would ever track across episodes. But someone did track it, and the tracking revealed that the telescope's orientation in different episodes corresponds in a loose but consistent way to where different celestial objects would have been visible from Springfield's approximate geographic location at the time those episodes originally aired. The animators appear to have been doing basic astronomical research to determine where a real observatory telescope in a real town of Springfield's approximate latitude and longitude would be pointing on any given night, and then positioning the Springfield Observatory's telescope accordingly. This is either an extraordinary act of background realism in service of a detail that nobody would ever consciously notice, or it is the most committed astronomy pun in the history of television. Easter egg 43. The Jebediah Springfield statue. The statue of Springfield's founder, Jebediah Springfield, stands in the center of Springfield's town square. It depicts Jebediah with a heroic pose and an upraised arm, the visual grammar of the civic statue the world over. Jebediah Springfield himself, as the show has established, was a complicated figure, not quite the heroic frontman the statue depicts. The hidden detail is in the statue's condition across different episodes. The statue of Jebediah Springfield is not always in the same state of repair. In some episodes, the statue appears pristine and well-maintained. In others, there is visible weathering. In a few background shots, there are what appear to be protest stickers on the statue's base, or graffiti that has been incompletely removed. The statue's condition tracks, loosely, with the civic mood of Springfield at different points in the show's run. In episodes where Springfield is feeling good about itself, Where there is a community project or a moment of civic pride, the statue tends to be in good repair. In episodes where the town is fracturing or demoralized, the statue shows signs of neglect. It is a background barometer of community health, measuring Springfield's relationship with itself through the condition of its most prominent public monument. The episode that examined Jebediah Springfield's complicated real history, that revealed him as a fraud and a pirate rather than the heroic founder the statue depicts, retroactively changes every appearance of that statue in every previous episode. The statue was always a lie, and the town's willingness to maintain that lie through the maintenance of the statue is the same dynamic at work in The Principal and the Pauper, compressed into a piece of bronze on a public square. Easter egg 44. Hans Moleman's driver's license. Hans Moleman, the tiny elderly man whom the show kills and resurrects with cheerful regularity, had a brief moment of quasi-spotlight in an episode that involved characters' driver's licenses. In the episode, Moleman's license is briefly visible on screen, and the license contains biographical information about him that is wildly inconsistent with his appearance. We have discussed elsewhere the revelation that Moleman claims to be 31 years old. The driver's license episode is where this is established, and the license itself, if you pause on the right frame, contains enough additional biographical detail to paint a picture of a person whose life has gone very wrong in ways the show never fully explains. The address on the license is not a location the show ever depicts. The photograph on the license looks, even by the show's visual standards, notably bad. The license has a class designation that suggests Moleman is legally permitted to operate vehicle types that the show never shows him operating, and the expiration date on the license, visible on freeze frame, suggests that Moleman has been eligible to renew and has not, which is either a joke about his relationship with bureaucratic obligation or a quiet indication that certain civic systems in Springfield work even less well for Hans Moleman than they do for everyone else. The license is on screen for perhaps 2 seconds. The information it contains rewards viewers willing to spend significantly longer than 2 seconds examining it. Easter egg 45. Barney Gumble's before and after. Barney Gumble is one of the show's saddest characters. The town drunk, Homer's best friend from childhood, a man who was by all depictions an exceptionally talented and sensitive person before alcohol took hold of him. The show has occasionally shown glimpses of what Barney was before, and the contrast between those glimpses and the Barney of the show's present is one of the more quietly devastating things the series does. The hidden detail is in the way Barney's background appearances and crowd shots change across the show's run. In early seasons, Barney is visibly present in crowd shots, often closer to the center of the action than his later characterization would suggest. He is in crowd shots at Springfield events in ways that suggest someone who is still, despite everything, participating in community life. In later seasons, Barney in crowd shots tends to be further from the center, more toward the edge of frames, more often partially obscured. He is still there. The show continues to place him in crowd shots through its later seasons, but his position within those shots has drifted to the margins in ways that track with the broader characterization of his social isolation. Nobody directed this as a deliberate visual metaphor, almost certainly, but the animators responsible for crowd shots, working on episodes years apart, consistently made choices about where to place Barney that produced a visual narrative about his social trajectory. The crowd shots tell a story about Barney Gumble that the show never tells in dialogue, through nothing more than where in the frame he is placed. Easter egg 46. The yellow used. Strategically. The Simpson family's yellow skin is one of the most iconic visual choices in television history. It is so familiar now that viewers no longer consciously register it as a choice. The Simpsons are yellow the way the sky is blue. It is simply the condition of the world. But the yellow was a deliberate decision made early in the show's production, and the reasoning behind it has been discussed in various interviews over the years. Matt Groening has explained that he wanted the family to be immediately identifiable when channel surfing, that a viewer flipping through channels would recognize the Simpson family from a single frame without needing to see their faces. Yellow achieved that instant recognizability. The hidden detail is in the specific shade of yellow used across the show's production history. The yellow is not always exactly the same yellow. It has shifted slightly over the decades, responding to changes in animation technology, changes in the visual standards of different broadcast formats, and the transition from analog to digital production. The yellow of the early seasons, rendered in the slightly washed-out palette of analog television, reads differently from the yellow of the show's digital era, which is slightly more saturated and precise. Most viewers absorb this shift without noticing it, but it happened. The Simpson family got infinitesimally more yellow over the course of the show's run, and the transition was so gradual and so tied to technology changes that it felt continuous rather than abrupt. The family has been yellowing for 36 years, and nobody noticed because nobody expected to notice it. Easter egg 47. Groundskeeper Willie's Shed. Groundskeeper Willie is Springfield Elementary's Scottish janitor, a man of enormous physical strength and very specific emotional volatility. He lives in a small shed on the school's grounds, a detail that functions primarily as a visual joke about the school's treatment of its staff, but which has been depicted in enough episodes to develop its own hidden details. The interior of Willie's shed is visible in several episodes, and the shed's interior contains objects that are consistent with a particular kind of biographical backstory for Willie that the show sketches rather than fully develops. There are Scottish artifacts, items that suggest a national pride maintained in exile. There are photographs, though they are rarely legible, that suggest a previous life before Springfield. There are tools and equipment that go beyond what a school janitor would typically need, suggesting that Willie has skills and a history that extend beyond his current position. What the shed's interior communicates, in the aggregate, is that Willie is a person who has been reduced, that the man living in the shed is not the full version of himself, that he arrived in Springfield from somewhere else and from something else, and that the shed is the space where the remnants of that previous self are stored. This is entirely consistent with the way the show depicts Willie in dialogue and plot, but the shed makes it visual, makes it spatial. You can see the reduced circumstances in the physical space he occupies. Easter egg 48. The retirement castle clock. The Springfield retirement castle, where Grandpa Simpson lives, has a clock on the wall of its common room. The clock, like the clock at Moe's, does not keep accurate time. But unlike the Moe's clock, which is stopped, the retirement castle clock runs. It just runs wrong. The time shown on the retirement castle clock in different scenes does not track with the time of day established by other visual cues in the same scenes. The joke underneath this detail is bleak. In a place where the residents have a fraught relationship with time, where many of them have lost track of what year it is, where the days may have an uncomfortable similarity to one another, the clock on the wall being wrong is a piece of environmental storytelling. The clock says time is passing, but it is wrong about what time it is, which is perhaps the most honest possible representation of what time feels like in a place like the Springfield retirement castle. The show has been careful, across episodes set at the castle, to maintain this inaccurate clock as a background detail. It would be easier to have the clock show the correct time, to have one less variable to manage. The decision to keep it wrong is either ongoing institutional memory of a background joke established early in the show's run, or evidence that someone in the production team has always known the clock was wrong and has chosen to leave it that way. Easter egg 49. Comic book guy's store inventory. The Android's Dungeon and Baseball card shop, run by Comic Book Guy, is one of Springfield's most specific and carefully rendered locations. Comic Book Guy himself is a satirical portrait of a certain kind of obsessive collector culture, a man who has organized his entire life around the acquisition and display of pop culture artifacts, and whose contempt for others is inversely proportional to his own happiness. The store's inventory, visible in background shots of the shop's shelves and display cases, has been built out with genuine care. The specific comics and collectibles visible in the shop's background across multiple episodes are, when examined closely, plausible items that a real shop of this type might carry. There are recognizable genres of comics. There are collectible figurines of the type that would appeal to Comic Book Guy's specific aesthetic sensibilities. The shop feels stocked in ways that are internally consistent with the characterization of the person running it. But the deeper hidden detail is in what is not in the store. There are no items in the Android's Dungeon that would suggest Comic Book Guy has ever sold anything to anyone. The shop always appears to contain the same approximate inventory. Items that should move, assuming the shop has any customers at all, do not appear to have moved. This is a background joke about the economic viability of the store, which is itself a background joke about Comic Book Guy's relationship with commerce versus collection. He is not really a merchant. He is a curator who charges admission and occasionally exchanges money for items under duress. Easter egg 50. The Simpsons Christmas tree. The Simpson family has put up a Christmas tree in multiple episodes, most famously in the pilot episode Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. The Christmas tree is a recurring visual element in holiday-themed episodes across the show's run. The hidden detail is in the ornaments on the tree. In the pilot episode, the tree's ornaments are sparse and humble, consistent with the financial circumstances depicted in that episode, where Homer does not have a Christmas bonus and is struggling to afford a proper holiday for his family. As the show continued and holiday episodes revisited the Simpson Christmas, the tree's ornamentation changed. In some later holiday episodes, the tree is more fully decorated. The specific ornaments visible on the tree in different episodes are not always consistent, which is expected given the show's general approach to continuity. But in the episodes where the ornaments are legible on freeze frame, some of them appear to be the same ornaments across multiple years, recurring pieces of decoration that the family has carried from holiday to holiday. These recurring ornaments are the kind of detail that makes the Simpson household feel like a real place, rather than a set, a place where objects have history and continuity, even when the show cannot always track that continuity perfectly. Section 6. Eggs 5160. There is something worth pausing on here. We are halfway through. The voice has been speaking for a while now, and if you have been listening with your eyes closed, Springfield has been building itself in the dark behind your eyelids. The power plant, Evergreen Terrace, Moe's, the school. Each of these places has layers upon layers of hidden detail, and we have only been skimming the surface of what is there. Let that thought settle for a moment, and then we will continue. Easter egg 51, the background band. In episodes featuring music or concert scenes in Springfield, there is often a band performing in the background. These bands are sometimes relevant to the plot, sometimes not. What they have in common is that their equipment, their staging, the details of how they are set up to perform, is always consistent with the genre of music they appear to be playing. A background rock band at Springfield's equivalent of a county fair is staged with the equipment and the spatial organization of a real small venue rock band. A background jazz ensemble at a Springfield restaurant has its members positioned in the configuration a real jazz ensemble would use for that setting. The visual grammar of live musical performance is being applied correctly to background bands that the show does not need to get right, in scenes where most viewers are not looking at the stage at all. This suggests a production team that had enough people on it with genuine musical knowledge to make sure the background bands were staged correctly, and the commitment to apply that knowledge to details that were never going to be the subject of anyone's critical attention. It is the kind of correctness that comes from caring about the texture of a world more than you need to for any specific commercial reason. Easter egg 52. Nelson's laugh and its echo. Nelson Muntz's laugh is one of the most recognizable sounds in animated television. The sound has been used by the show, by its audience, and by the broader culture as shorthand for a particular flavor of schadenfreude. It is a single exhaled syllable, a sound of pointed mockery, and it has become so culturally embedded that it functions as a meme before memes were named. The hidden detail is in how the laugh is deployed in the background of crowd shots. Nelson laughs at specific things. If you track the things that cause Nelson to laugh in the background of crowd scenes, in the scenes where he is not a primary focus but where he is visible among the crowd, the laugh tends to appear in response to things that are genuinely worthy of the pointed observation the laugh implies. The crowd is reacting to a spectacle. Nelson is reacting to the gap between what the spectacle promises and what it delivers. He is laughing at the disappointment, at the hubris, at the thing the other crowd members have not yet noticed is going wrong. In the background of crowd scenes, Nelson is doing a kind of social commentary that his foreground characterization as a bully does not always make room for. He is the most honest audience member at every Springfield civic event, and the show puts him in crowd shots specifically to catch his honest reaction, even when nobody in the crowd shot is the narrative focus. Easter egg 53. Smithers' computer desktop. Wayland Smithers' desk at the nuclear power plant has a computer on it. In several episodes where the camera briefly shows the computer screen on Smithers' desk, the desktop is visible and the desktop has things on it. Files, icons, open windows, the visual language of a 1990s or early 2000s computer interface rendered in the Simpsons art style. The items visible on Smithers' computer desktop in different episodes are consistent with his characterization as Burns' devoted personal assistant. There are scheduling applications. There are files with names that reference the plant's administrative infrastructure. And in at least one episode, visible on freeze frame in a shot where the computer is not the scene's focus, there is an icon on Smithers' desktop whose label, when read closely, reveals something personal about Smithers' inner life that the show is approaching delicately. This is the kind of detail that requires the animators to think about who Smithers is when he is not performing his role as Burns' assistant. Who is Smithers when he is at his computer, doing administrative work, with no audience? The answer is on his desktop, in one brief frame of animation, and the detail is placed there with enough care that it rewards exactly the kind of obsessive freeze-frame examination that most of the show's hidden details reward. Easter egg 54. The Town Hall's architecture. Springfield's Town Hall is one of the town's most frequently depicted civic buildings. It is where public meetings happen, where Springfield's government conducts its business, where the town collectively makes decisions about its own life. The building has been depicted in establishing shots and in interior scenes across hundreds of episodes. The architecture of Springfield Town Hall has hidden details. The building's facade contains decorative stonework that, examined closely, depicts scenes from Springfield's civic history. These scenes are in the tradition of public buildings that use architectural decoration to tell the story of the community they serve. But the scenes depicted in Springfield Town Hall's decorative stonework are not heroic. They are, in the visual vocabulary of public architectural ornament, depicting scenes from Springfield's history that are more complicated and less flattering than the civic boosterism typically represented by this kind of building. There is a carved relief visible in one establishing shot that appears to depict a moment of civic failure rather than civic triumph. Another appears to depict a moment that tracks with the show's established backstory about Springfield's founding and the real nature of Jebediah Springfield. The building is literally carved with the truth about the town it serves, in decorative stonework that nobody looks at. Easter egg 55. The classroom aquarium. Mrs. Krabappel's fourth-grade classroom has a small aquarium in the corner. The aquarium appears in the background of classroom scenes across multiple seasons, a small detail of environmental dressing that makes the classroom feel like a real classroom rather than just a backdrop for scenes about Bart's behavior. The fish in the aquarium are not consistent across episodes, which again could be simple continuity inconsistency, but the number of fish in the aquarium changes in a direction that tells a story. In early episodes where the aquarium is visible, it contains several fish. In later episodes, the number of fish is smaller. The aquarium appears to be losing its inhabitants over time, and nobody in the classroom appears to be adding new ones. This is either a very long-running background joke about the neglect that characterizes Springfield Elementary's educational environment, or it is a continuity error that happened to produce a visual narrative of attrition. The aquarium in the background of Mrs. Krabappel's classroom, slowly losing its fish across seasons, is either a thoughtful metaphor or a happy accident, and the inability to determine which is itself part of what makes The Simpsons such a rich text for this kind of examination. Easter egg 56. Burns' art collection. Mr. Burns' mansion contains an extensive art collection. This is established in episodes that take place inside the mansion, where the walls are hung with paintings and the rooms are furnished with antiques, and the general aesthetic is one of wealth so old and so consolidated that it has long since passed through mere ostentation into a kind of austere, institutional richness. The paintings visible on the walls of Burns' mansion have been examined by viewers with knowledge of art history, and the examination reveals something interesting. The works visible in Burns' collection are not all fictional. Some of the paintings on Burns' walls are recognizable as works by real artists, or as parodies of specific real paintings. The collection visible in the background of Burns' mansion scenes includes representations of works from art historical periods consistent with Burns' extremely extended lifespan. Burns could plausibly have acquired some of these works during the periods when they were being produced or first sold. His collection, read as the accumulation of someone who has been alive for well over a century and who has had the resources to acquire significant works throughout that time, tells a different story than a collection acquired in a single lifetime. The hidden detail in the Burns art collection is the implied biography of its collector, visible in which works are present, and what periods they represent. Easter egg 57. The school cafeteria menu. Springfield Elementary's cafeteria has a menu board. The menu board is visible in the background of cafeteria scenes across multiple episodes, and the menu changes between episodes. The specific items on the cafeteria menu have been examined by viewers, and the examination reveals a catering philosophy, if it can be called that, which is deeply consistent with the show's depiction of the school as an institution operating under severe budget constraints. The menu items on the cafeteria board are creative in the way that cooking under extreme constraints forces creativity. They are combinations of things that individually might be components of a real meal, but which assembled together suggest a kitchen working with whatever was available rather than whatever was appropriate. Some of the menu items, readable on freeze frame, are things that children would refuse to eat. Others are things that children might accept only because they are too hungry to object. The cafeteria menu in the background of scenes set in Springfield Elementary's lunchroom is a running commentary on public school funding in America, delivered through the background prop of a food service signboard that no character in the scene ever reads aloud. Easter egg 58. The temperature changes. Springfield's climate has been inconsistent across its run, consistent with the show's broader geographic impossibility. The town experiences tropical heat waves and blizzards and everything in between, sometimes within what the show presents as the same season. But the hidden detail is in the background visual indicators of temperature within Springfield. When the show depicts Springfield in summer heat, the background elements of outdoor scenes respond to that heat in specific ways. Animals behave differently, plants are in specific states. The visual texture of the outdoor environment carries summer markers that are consistently applied across episodes set in summer, even when those episodes air at different times of year. The consistency with which the show's backgrounds track seasonal and temperature shifts is one of those background details that the viewer does not consciously notice, but that creates a sense of Springfield as a place with a real climate. The backgrounds breathe with the weather. And the craft involved in maintaining that background seasonal consistency across decades of production is the kind of invisible work that makes a cartoon feel like a world. Easter egg 59. Chief Wiggum's evidence room. The Springfield Police Department has an evidence room. This is depicted in a small number of episodes where the plot requires access to confiscated items, and the evidence room is one of those background locations that gets just enough screen time to be examined by attentive viewers. The evidence room contains items that do not obviously belong to any specific case. There are objects in the evidence room that appear to have been there for a very long time, based on their apparent age and condition. There are items in the evidence room that, if you read the evidence tags attached to them on freeze frame, belong to cases that either predate any episode of the show or correspond to events in Springfield's background lore that were never given their own episodes. The evidence room is, in other words, an archive. A catalog of Springfield's crime history, most of which has never been depicted on screen. The items in that room imply a community history of transgression and misfortune that extends far beyond what the show has chosen to dramatize. A history of things that happened and were confiscated and were never returned and are sitting in an evidence room that nobody appears to be actively monitoring. Easter egg 60. The newspaper crossword. In at least one episode where a character is visible reading a Springfield shopper, and the newspaper is positioned in such a way that the crossword puzzle on the back page is facing the camera, the crossword is legible on freeze frame. The clues in the crossword are not random. They correspond to topics that are relevant to the episode in question. The newspaper that exists in the background of a scene contains a crossword puzzle whose clues are about the things happening in the episode around it. This is a very labor-intensive background joke. Someone had to write crossword clues. Someone had to make sure the crossword was positioned correctly relative to the camera. Someone had to make the decision that this was worth doing in a frame that would be on screen for, perhaps, 3 seconds. The crossword in the background of the newspaper exists for the viewer who pauses the episode at exactly the right moment, and then zooms in and reads the small text of a crossword puzzle on the back page of a fictional newspaper, and the viewer is rewarded with clues that are relevant to the story they are already watching. Section 7. Eggs 6170. We are moving through the second half now. The eggs are getting richer, the connections between them more complex. The show's hidden layers are not just individual jokes tucked into corners. They are a system, a set of practices that the production team developed and maintained across decades, producing a texture of hidden meaning that accumulates into something larger than any single egg. Easter egg 61. The funeral home. Springfield has a funeral home. It is visible in the background of a small number of episodes and appears more prominently in episodes that deal with death or mortality. The funeral home signage, visible in establishing shots, contains its name and, occasionally, a piece of marketing copy that the funeral home has chosen to put on its external sign. That marketing copy, readable on freeze frame in different episodes, changes, and the things it says are darkly funny in ways that track with the funeral industry's uncomfortable position as a business that must sell a service people need but do not want. The sign copy visible on the funeral home across different episodes spans from the genuinely comforting to the almost adversarially candid about the nature of its business. One version of the sign's marketing text, readable in the background of a shot where no character is paying attention to it, has been cited by fans as one of the best jokes in the entire show, hidden entirely in background signage. Easter egg 62. The bowling alley scores. Springfield Lanes, the bowling alley where Homer and Marge had their first date, and where Homer occasionally retreats for solace, has appeared in enough episodes that its interior is reasonably well established. The scoring system at the bowling alley, the overhead display boards that show bowlers' running totals, is visible in the background of bowling alley scenes. The scores visible on those boards are not random. In episodes set at the bowling alley, the scores on the display boards for lanes other than the ones the characters are using are in progress, consistent with an active bowling session. They have players with names, and those names are not always random. In at least one episode, the names on the background bowling lane scoreboards are the names of members of the episode's writing team. In another, the names are references to Simpsons characters who have not appeared in recent episodes, a background roll call of the show's supporting cast embedded in a bowling score display. Easter egg 63. The teacher's desk. Mrs. Krabappel's desk, the primary authority prop in Springfield Elementary's 4th grade classroom, has items on it that change between episodes. The specific items on the desk have been examined by viewers, and they reveal something about Edna Krabappel's inner life that her classroom persona does not always make room for. On her desk in various episodes, there are photographs that are turned away from the students, visible only from behind. The backs of those photographs are toward the camera in certain shots, and the frames holding those photographs are identifiable as belonging to a specific period and aesthetic that is consistent with Mrs. Krabappel's established biographical background. There are books on her desk that go beyond the curriculum. There are handwritten notes, not legible in most shots, but occasionally legible on freeze frame, that are not about lesson planning. Edna Krabappel's desk is the desk of a person who is a more complicated human being than her role in Bart's disciplinary life suggests. The complexity is in the objects. The objects are on the desk. The desk is in the background. Easter egg 64. The Lard Lad Donut. Lard Lad is Springfield's version of the Big Boy restaurant mascot, a large statue of a rotund child holding an enormous donut, which stands in front of the Lard Lad Donuts restaurant. The statue has appeared in multiple episodes, most famously in the Treehouse of Horror episode where the statue comes to life and terrorizes Springfield. The hidden detail is in the specific donut the statue holds. The donut in the Lard Lad statue's hand is not always the same donut. The visual details of the animated donut change across appearances in ways that track with the episode's tone. In episodes where the statue is background furniture, the donut is a standard pink frosted sprinkled donut of the type Homer would eat. In the Treehouse of Horror episode where the statue is threatening, the donut is animated with slightly different visual qualities, slightly more imposing, slightly more exaggerated, consistent with the episode's horror register. This is a prop that changes its appearance to serve the emotional needs of the scene it appears in, while remaining visually consistent enough that most viewers register it as simply the Lard Lad donut across all appearances. Easter egg 65. Scratchy's expressions. In Itchy and Scratchy cartoons, the violence inflicted on Scratchy is the primary source of the comedy. Scratchy is a cat who suffers repeatedly and inventively at the hands of Itchy the mouse. The violence is the joke, and the joke is about the violence, and that is the entire premise of the show within the show. But in the brief moments before each Itchy and Scratchy cartoon escalates to its violent conclusion, Scratchy has expressions. Small moments of pre-violence characterization where the cat is doing something ordinary, walking down the street, eating breakfast, watering a garden. In those brief pre-violence moments, Scratchy's expression is not dread, it is contentment. The hidden detail is that Scratchy, in every Itchy and Scratchy cartoon, begins in a state of genuine happiness. He is always, in the frames before Itchy arrives, enjoying something. He is always in the middle of a small pleasure. And then Itchy arrives, and the cartoon ends the way it always ends. This is the darkest possible reading of the Itchy and Scratchy format. It is not just that Scratchy suffers, it is that Scratchy, every time, has just been happy. The violence always interrupts something good, and Scratchy's expression of contentment in those opening frames is the hidden joke that makes the violence that follows more than just cartoon brutality. Easter egg 66. The high school trophy case. Springfield High School, the institution that produced both Homer Simpson and Marge Bouvier, has a trophy case in its hallway. The trophy case is visible in flashback episodes set during Homer and Marge's high school years, and the trophies in the case are legible in some of those shots. The trophies in Springfield High School's trophy case do not record the athletic achievements you would expect. They record achievements of a more idiosyncratic nature, consistent with the kind of small-town high school that the show depicts Springfield High as being. There are trophies for things that are not typically trophy-worthy. There are plaques recording achievements that, examined closely, are more ambiguous than a standard trophy usually implies. And in the background of one hallway shot, behind the trophy case, there is a pennant or banner that references a team name for Springfield High's sports program that is consistent across multiple flashback episodes but is never spoken aloud in any dialogue. It exists only in the background, in the prop design of the school's hallway decor, available to viewers who pause and look. Easter egg 67. The Treehouse of Horror. Intro modifications. We touched briefly earlier on the visual modifications to the title sequence in Treehouse of Horror episodes, but the full scope of those modifications deserves its own entry, because the changes are more extensive than a casual viewing suggests. The Treehouse of Horror specials modify the opening title sequence in ways that go beyond the obvious changes to the music and the Halloween-themed staging. Specific background elements in the Springfield establishing shot at the start of the sequence are altered in ways that foreshadow the specific content of the episode's 3 segments. A visual element that will become important in the first segment appears, in modified form, in the background of the opening shot. A detail from the second segment is hidden in the crowd of Springfield citizens visible during the couch gag. The title sequence of the Treehouse of Horror episode, in other words, is a preview of the episode's content hidden in plain sight, available to viewers who watch the title sequence carefully rather than waiting for the episode proper to begin. The modifications are different for every Treehouse episode, requiring the production team to create a custom version of the opening for every Halloween special, with foreshadowing details specific to that year's content. Easter egg 68. Ned's Bible annotations. Ned Flanders reads the Bible. This is not a hidden detail. It is one of the most explicitly established facts about his character. His faith is central to everything the show depicts about him. But the hidden detail is in how the Bible appears in scenes where Ned is holding or reading it. In multiple episodes where Ned is visible with his Bible, the Bible appears to have annotations in the margins. The handwriting is not legible in most shots. The margins are too small and the Bible is too far from the camera. But in a small number of shots where the Bible is positioned closer to the camera, or where a freeze frame allows examination of a still, the annotations appear to be in a handwriting that is dense and thorough, the kind of margin notes left by someone who has read the same text many times and has accumulated interpretations and cross-references across years of study. Ned's Bible is not a prop Bible. It is a prop Bible that has been given the visual appearance of a working annotated Bible, used by someone who takes the text seriously enough to engage with it at that level of detail. The annotation work is done even though the annotations are almost never legible. The Bible looks like Ned's Bible. Easter egg 69. The power plant's radiation suit closet. The nuclear power plant has radiation protective equipment. Safety suits and hazmat gear are depicted in certain plant-focused episodes, stored in a closet near the main work area. The closet is visible in a handful of shots across multiple episodes. The radiation suits in the closet are not all in the same condition. Some appear well-maintained. Others appear worn, patched, or in states of repair that suggest they have seen considerable use. And in some shots of the closet, there are suits that appear to be missing, empty hooks where equipment should be hanging. The missing suits are not explained. No character references them. The empty hooks in the radiation suit closet at a nuclear power plant are simply there, in the background, visible if you pause the right frame. Within the fiction of the show, the absence of protective equipment from its designated storage location in a nuclear facility is a small, quiet catastrophe hiding in a closet. Within the radiation theory, the missing suits are evidence of a plant where safety equipment is not properly tracked, a fact that is consistent with the 342 safety violations documented in the show's canon. Easter egg 70. The Simpsons address in other media. 742. Evergreen Terrace, Springfield, USA, is one of the most famous fictional addresses in the world. The address has appeared in the show's universe in multiple forms across multiple episodes, on mail, on official documents, on the side of packages. The address is a piece of Springfield geography that functions as an anchor, the specific location that everything else in the Simpson family's universe orbits around. The hidden detail is in how the address has been used in real life by fans and by the show's production team, and how those real-life uses have occasionally found their way back into the show itself. There are Simpsons episodes where the address visible on a piece of mail addressed to the Simpson family includes a zip code. That zip code does not correspond to any real Springfield, but it has been consistent across all appearances of the zip code in the show. Someone chose a specific zip code and used it consistently, which means someone chose the zip code at some point and then made sure everyone who subsequently animated a piece of mail addressed to the Simpson family knew what zip code to use. That level of small detail consistency, maintained across decades and across many different animators, requires institutional memory and communication about something as apparently trivial as a fictional zip code. The fact that it is consistent suggests that someone, somewhere, has a Bible for the background details of Springfield that is more comprehensive than most viewers would expect. Section 8. Eggs 7180. The deeper you go into the background of The Simpsons, the more you realize that the people who built Springfield were building something they intended to last. They were hiding jokes and references for people who had not been born yet, for viewing technologies that did not exist when the show was being made, for a kind of cultural archaeology that could not have been predicted in 1989, but which the internet would eventually make possible and popular. The show was built for its future. Easter egg 71. The second bank of Springfield sign. Springfield has at least two banks visible in the show's background. The First Bank of Springfield and a second banking institution whose signage is visible in the background of exterior shots in several episodes. The Second Bank of Springfield sign changes its slogan across different appearances in ways that track with Springfield's economic climate at the time of different episodes. During episodes set against a backdrop of civic prosperity, the Second Bank of Springfield's external sign displays slogans that are conventionally optimistic about the future and about the institution's financial stability. During episodes set against a backdrop of economic difficulty, the slogan visible on the bank sign is slightly more ambiguous, hedging its promises in ways that suggest an institution that is less certain about its own prospects. The bank's signage is functioning as a background economic indicator, a way of tracking Springfield's economic health that does not require any character to comment on it. The town's financial temperature is visible in what its financial institutions are promising on their external signage, and the change in those promises across episodes mirrors what the show is depicting through plot and dialogue, confirmed and reinforced in the background without anyone needing to point at it. Easter egg 72. The dumpster behind Krusty's studio. The television studio where the Krusty the Clown show is filmed has a dumpster visible behind the building in establishing exterior shots. The dumpster appears in a small number of shots, present enough to be noticed in aggregate, absent often enough that individual viewers might never put together that they have seen it in multiple episodes. The content of the dumpster changes between appearances. In some shots, the dumpster contains objects that are immediately recognizable as discarded Krusty Show merchandise, the kind of branded commercial product that the Krusty franchise produces in enormous quantities and which, judging by the dumpster, apparently does not always sell. In other shots, the dumpster contains things that are harder to identify but which are consistent with the day-to-day waste of a children's television production. In at least one shot, the dumpster behind Krusty's studio contains what appears to be a discarded Krusty costume, an empty clown suit crumpled at the bottom of a dumpster behind the studio where the show is filmed. The image of the discarded clown costume in the dumpster says everything about Krusty's relationship with his own persona that the show has ever tried to say in dialogue. In one background image, available to viewers who pause on the exterior shot of Krusty's studio. Easter egg 73, the Wiggum family dinner. Chief Clancy Wiggum is Springfield's police chief, a man whose relationship with effective law enforcement is, at best, aspirational. He is depicted as incompetent, self-interested, and easily distracted. But the show has also, across multiple episodes, given him a domestic life that functions as a counterpoint to his professional failures. In episodes set inside the Wiggum family home, the dinner table scenes visible in the background of certain shots contain details about what the family is eating, about the family's domestic routines, about the relationship between Clancy and his wife Sarah and their son Ralph. The background details of the Wiggum dinner table, when examined, paint a picture of a family that is doing okay in spite of everything. The home feels like a home. The food on the table is humble but adequate. The visual language of the Wiggum family dinner does not suggest dysfunction. It suggests modest, genuine domestic life. This is a background humanization of a character who is predominantly used as a vehicle for incompetence jokes. The dinner table behind the jokes is a real dinner table, and the family around it is real enough that you can see it in the background if you look. Easter egg 74. Otto's bus. Otto Mann drives Springfield Elementary's school bus. He is a heavy metal enthusiast, a former member of a band, and a man whose relationship with sobriety has been depicted as complicated. His bus appears in many episodes, and the bus itself is a background character with its own visual biography. The damage to Otto's bus accumulates across the show's run. In early seasons, the bus has certain dents and scratches. In later seasons, those dents are still there, and new ones have been added. The bus does not get repaired. It simply collects damage, the way a vehicle used heavily by someone who is not particularly focused on maintenance tends to collect damage. This continuity of bus damage across the show's run is the kind of detail that requires institutional memory, someone knowing which dents were on the bus in the last episode and making sure the appropriate dents are on the bus in this episode. Inside the bus, visible through the windows in some exterior shots, the decorative elements that Otto has added to personalize his workspace are also consistent across appearances. The bus, inside and out, is Otto's bus. It has been built as an expression of the specific person who drives it. Easter egg 75. The swanky Springfield Country Club. Springfield has a country club used by its wealthier residents. The country club's interior is depicted in episodes where characters from Springfield's upper economic tier are interacting, and the club's visual design is a careful parody of what an affluent American private club of a certain era would look like. The hidden details are in the portraits on the walls. Private clubs of this type traditionally hang portraits of their founding members and notable past presidents, and the Springfield Country Club follows this tradition. The portraits are visible in the background of club scenes, and the faces in those portraits, while stylized in the show's visual language, are recognizable to sharp-eyed viewers as caricatures of real people, not necessarily famous people. The specific people depicted in the club's founding member portraits appear, based on comparison with other visual evidence in the show, to be caricatures of the Simpsons writing staff and production team from earlier periods of the show's run. The writers are in the portraits on the walls of Springfield's Country Club, rendered as the founding members of an institution they gave the characters in their show the opportunity to satirize. There is something very pleasing about the recursive quality of that decision. Easter egg 76. The Quick E-Mart security camera. The Quick E-Mart has a security camera. It appears in the upper corner of the store's interior in many scenes set at the Quick E-Mart, and it is one of those background details that most viewers register as realistic texture and ignore. Convenience stores have security cameras. Of course, the Quick E-Mart has a security camera. The hidden detail is in what the security camera is pointed at. The camera in the Quick E-Mart is not pointed at the cash register, which is where the most theft typically occurs in a retail environment. The camera is pointed toward the door, specifically the door that leads to the back of the store. This is not where the shoplifted merchandise is. This is not where the cash is. The camera is pointed at the part of the store that Apu does not want anyone to see. What is in the back of the Quick E-Mart is a matter of considerable fan speculation. The show has hinted at various things over the years, and some of those hints have been dark. The security camera's orientation, pointing at the door to the back rather than at the merchandise or the cash, is consistent with a Quick E-Mart that has something in its back room worth monitoring more carefully than its inventory. Easter egg 77. The Simpsons mailbox. The mailbox at 742 Evergreen Terrace has been depicted in exterior shots of the Simpson house across the show's run. The mailbox is background furniture in the most literal sense, a piece of suburban property that anchors the establishing shots of the most famous fictional address in television history. But the mailbox is occasionally full of mail. And in the shots where mail is visible in the mailbox, some of that mail is legible on freeze frame. The names on the envelopes visible in the Simpson mailbox are not always addressed to the Simpson family. Some of the mail appears to be addressed to previous residents of 742 Evergreen Terrace, people who lived there before the Simpsons, and whose mail is still, after all these years, arriving at the address. Other pieces of mail in the mailbox are addressed to characters who have never been established as residing at that address. The mailbox at 742 Evergreen Terrace contains ghost mail, letters for people who no longer live there, or who never did. This is either a running joke about the inefficiency of Springfield's postal service, or a background detail about the address's history that the show has never chosen to explore further. Easter egg 78. The power plant's hiring board. Inside the Springfield nuclear power plant, in a common area visible in a small number of episodes, there is a bulletin board. Bulletin boards in workplaces accumulate things. Announcements, job postings, cartoons, complaints dressed as jokes. The bulletin board at the power plant follows this pattern. The notices on the bulletin board at the power plant change between episodes, and the specific notices visible on freeze frame are consistent with an employer that is simultaneously legally required to post certain safety information and actively invested in minimizing how seriously employees take that information. There are notices about safety protocols that are bureaucratic in their comprehensiveness and therefore likely to be ignored. There are notices about employee benefits that contain fine print. There are handwritten additions to printed notices that suggest employees engaging with the posted material in the way that frustrated employees engage with workplace communication. One specific notice on the power plant bulletin board, visible in the background of a work scene, has been identified as referencing a specific OSHA regulation in a way that is legally compliant on its face, but practically designed to obscure the information it is required to communicate. Someone researched OSHA regulations to write background text for a workplace bulletin board that appears for 3 seconds in the background of a nuclear power plant scene. Easter egg 79. The library books. Springfield has a public library. The library appears in a small number of episodes, typically in connection with Lisa's intellectual life or the occasional plot that requires access to archival Springfield information. The library's interior is depicted in enough episodes to establish its visual character. The titles on the spines of the books visible on the library's shelves are legible in several shots. Some of those titles are references to real books. Others are fictional Springfield titles, invented books whose titles are jokes or references in their own right. The combination of real book references and fictional book jokes creates a library shelf that feels lived in and specific to Springfield, a collection built by the particular tastes and needs of a particular community rather than a generic representation of a library's contents. Among the real book titles visible on Springfield Library shelves are books that are relevant to the show's themes, books about nuclear energy, about corporate power, about small-town American life, about the history of American labor. The Library of Springfield contains, in its visible shelves, books that could explain to any resident who cared to read them exactly what has happened to their town. The books are there. The information is available. Nobody checks them out. Easter egg 80. Dr. Hibbert's office plants. Dr. Julius Hibbert's medical office has plants in it. This is realistic texture. Many medical offices have plants, which provide a sense of calm and life in spaces that can feel clinical. Dr. Hibbert's office plants are visible in the background of scenes set in his examination room and his waiting room. The hidden detail is that the plants in Dr. Hibbert's office are visibly different states of health in different episodes. In some episodes, the plants appear thriving. In others, they appear to be struggling, dropping leaves, in need of water that has not been provided. The health of the plants in Dr. Hibbert's office varies, and the variation correlates loosely with episodes where Dr. Hibbert himself is depicted as overwhelmed or distracted by the volume of medical needs in Springfield. A doctor who is too busy attending to Springfield's bottomless medical needs to keep his own office plants alive is a small, precise background joke about the relationship between public health infrastructure and individual capacity. The plants in Hibbert's office are a health indicator for the town's healthcare system, and they are sometimes dying. Section 9. Eggs 8190. There is a particular pleasure in this kind of attention. The show rewards it so consistently that the act of watching carefully, of pausing and examining, becomes its own relationship with the material. The Simpsons is a different show depending on how closely you look at it. At normal viewing speed, it is a comedy. In freeze frame, examining the backgrounds, it is something else. Something more like archaeology. We are not just watching a show tonight. We are digging. Easter egg 81. The Homer-written Valentine. In a Valentine's Day episode, Homer attempts to write Marge a love letter. The letter is visible briefly on screen, and in the shot where the camera shows the letter from Marge's perspective, the letter is legible. The letter is not what Homer described it as. The gap between what Homer says about what he has written and what the letter actually says is the joke. But the secondary hidden detail is in the handwriting itself. Homer's handwriting, as depicted on the letter, is inconsistent with handwriting that would belong to someone of his age who had been writing for decades. It is the kind of handwriting that suggests someone who did not practice writing very much, who did not have the benefit of consistent educational support in developing their penmanship, who writes infrequently enough that the muscles involved have not built up the automation that regular writers develop. Homer's handwriting is the handwriting of a man whose educational history has been inconsistent, whose cognitive development was interrupted, and who writes by effort rather than by habit. The letter is on screen briefly enough that most viewers will not examine the handwriting in detail, but it is there, consistent with the show's broader characterization of Homer as a man operating below the cognitive level his circumstances require. Easter egg 82. Bart's closet. Bart Simpson's room has a closet. The closet is visible in episodes set in Bart's room, typically in the open position because Bart is not the kind of person who closes his closet. The interior of Bart's closet has been depicted enough times to establish its contents, and those contents are revealing. Bart's closet contains a skateboard, which is expected. It contains sports equipment, which is consistent, but it also contains things that are less expected and more revealing. There are things in Bart's closet that suggest emotional complexity that his exterior persona does not always make room for. Hidden things, things that are stored at the back, things that would be embarrassing for Bart to have discovered by his family or his friends. The specific items in the back of Bart's closet, visible in background shots of his room, have been cataloged by fans, and the catalog suggests a kid who is building a private inner life that is distinct from his public persona as Springfield's 10-year-old agent of chaos. The closet is where the private Bart lives, between the skateboard and the sports equipment, in the shadows at the back. Easter egg 83. The Krusty Show rehearsal footage. In episodes where the Krusty the Clown Show is depicted in its production phase, where we see the show being prepared or rehearsed rather than simply broadcast, there are background monitors showing footage from previous episodes of the show within the show. This is standard visual shorthand for a working television production. But the footage visible on those monitors is not always generic footage of Krusty and Sideshow Mel being funny. In some shots where the monitor content is legible, the footage shown is from specific Krusty Show segments that were depicted in previous Simpsons episodes, meaning that the show within the show has its own continuity, visible in the background monitors of its production facility. This creates a situation where attentive viewers of the main show can track the Krusty Show's production history through brief background glimpses of monitor footage, and where that production history is consistent with what they remember from episodes that depicted the Krusty Show in previous seasons. The Krusty Show has an in-world archive of its own content, and that archive occasionally appears in the background of scenes about the show's production. Easter egg 84. The map of Springfield. Springfield has been depicted on maps within the show itself. These in-world maps of Springfield appear in a small number of episodes, typically in contexts where a character is navigating the town or where Springfield's geography is relevant to the plot. The hidden details are in the maps themselves. The in-world maps of Springfield are inconsistent with each other. Different maps show different geographic relationships between Springfield's major landmarks. The distance between the power plant and downtown Springfield is different on different maps. The location of Evergreen Terrace relative to the school changes between different maps that appear in different episodes. This is consistent with the show's overall approach to Springfield's geography, its deliberate refusal to commit to a fixed spatial logic. But the specific inconsistencies between different in-world maps have been documented by fans, and the documentation reveals something interesting. Some of the inconsistencies are in exactly the same locations on different maps, suggesting that the inconsistencies are not random but are concentrated around specific geographic relationships that the show has consistently chosen not to fix. There are places on the map of Springfield where the show will not commit to a distance or a direction, and those places are consistently the areas around the nuclear power plant and its relationship to the residential neighborhoods that surround it. The geography of potential contamination is the geography that the show's internal maps refuse to settle. Easter egg 85. Marge's letters to the network. Marge Simpson has occasionally written letters to television networks complaining about programming she finds objectionable. This is depicted in episodes where Marge takes up a cause of media decency, and the letters are part of her characterization as someone who cares about her family's media environment. In episodes where those letters are visible on screen before being sent, they are occasionally legible on freeze frame. The letters are not always about what Marge says they are about. The content of the letters sometimes includes information that Marge did not announce to Homer, concerns about things other than the explicit target of her campaign. The letters reveal a Marge who is worried about more than she typically says out loud, and the things she is worried about are consistent with the things the show has established about her inner life across its run. Marge's letters to television networks are background documents of her private anxieties, and those anxieties, when legible, add a layer of complexity to her characterization that her on-screen dialogue sometimes leaves unexpressed. Easter egg 86. The real reason for the donut. Homer Simpson's relationship with donuts is one of the most iconic comedic elements of the show. The glazed pink frosted donut is practically the show's visual mascot at this point, as recognizable as Homer's face. But the specific donut Homer eats, its precise visual design, its size, and its color has a history. The pink frosted donut that Homer eats is not an invention of the show's animators working from pure imagination. The design of Homer's donut tracks closely with a specific type of donut sold by a specific regional American donut chain that was headquartered in the Pacific Northwest during the period when The Simpsons was being developed. Matt Groening, who has acknowledged Oregon as an influence on Springfield, was familiar with this specific donut from his years in the Pacific Northwest, and the show's donut design reflects that regional specificity. The donut Homer eats is a real donut from a real place. The place is embedded in the biography of the show's creator, and the donut is so culturally iconic now that millions of people associate pink frosted donuts with Homer Simpson rather than with the regional bakery tradition that inspired the design. Easter egg 87. The birthday party decorations. The Simpsons family celebrates birthdays in a small number of episodes, and birthday party scenes at the Simpson house or at Springfield's party venues have specific decorations visible in the background. Those decorations are not generic. They are specific to the character whose birthday is being celebrated. In birthday scenes for different family members, the background decorations reflect the tastes and interests of the person whose birthday it is, as those tastes have been established across the show's run. A birthday party for Lisa has decorations that are consistent with what we know about her aesthetic preferences, her interests, the things she cares about. A birthday party for Bart has completely different decorations. The parties, visually, belong to the people they are for. This requires the animators responsible for birthday party scenes to know the characters well enough to determine what kinds of decorations those characters would find appropriate or pleasing for their own celebration, and then to put those decorations in the background of scenes where no character is likely to comment on them. The decorations are for the characters, not for the viewers. They are a form of visual respect for who the characters are. Easter egg 88. the Springfield Shopper's opinion section. We have discussed the Springfield Shopper's front page headlines at length. But the newspaper has an opinion section, and the opinion section is visible in some of the shots where characters hold the paper open to its interior pages. The opinion columns visible in those shots are legible on freeze frame, and what they say is worth examining. The opinion columns in the Springfield Shopper's visible interior pages are not always the views of Springfield citizens reflecting on Springfield events. In some shots, the opinion section is running content that is directly relevant to the episode's themes, content that functions as a background Greek chorus commenting on what the foreground characters are experiencing. The newspaper's editorial perspective on the events of the episode is visible in the background of the scene in which those events are occurring. The Springfield Shopper has opinions about what is happening in Springfield, and those opinions are legible, in print, in the background of scenes where its readers are too preoccupied with the events being described to look down and read what the newspaper is saying about them. Easter egg 89. The elementary school's water fountain. Springfield Elementary has a water fountain in its hallway. The water fountain appears in the background of hallway scenes, a standard piece of school infrastructure that functions as environmental texture. Students pass it. Nobody comments on it. The water from the fountain, in episodes where the fountain is close enough to the camera to have its water visible, is not always clear. In some shots, the water coming from the fountain has a slightly off color. It is not dramatically wrong. It is not bright green or luminous. It is just slightly not the color water should be, in a way that is visible if you are looking for it and invisible if you are not. The water coming from Springfield Elementary's drinking water fountain is not quite right. This is consistent with the radiation theory's claim about Springfield's water supply. It is consistent with the show's background depiction of a community whose infrastructure is compromised, and it is never commented on by any character, which is consistent with the show's broader observation that Springfield's residents do not question the things that should alarm them. Easter egg 90. The Flanders backyard. The Flanders family's backyard, accessible through their back fence from the Simpson family's yard, has been depicted in enough episodes to establish its visual character. The backyard is consistent with what the show has established about Ned Flanders as a person. Tidy, well-maintained, with a garden that reflects the care its owner puts into things. But in the background of some shots that include the Flanders backyard, there are details that suggest a different dimension of Ned's domestic life. In the corner of the backyard, partially obscured by the fence in some shots, there is what appears to be a small shrine or memorial. The object is not always visible. Its details are not always clear. But in the shots where it is visible and where freeze frame allows examination, it appears to be a memorial to Maud Flanders, to the wife Ned lost. The memorial in Ned's backyard, in the corner away from the view from the street, in the private space of his garden, is a detail about grief and private remembrance that the show puts in the background and never addresses in dialogue. Ned's loss, which the show has acknowledged in its way, is also commemorated in his backyard in a way that no other character ever sees, in a way that exists only for Ned and for viewers paying close enough attention. Section 10. Eggs 91. 101. We are coming to the end. The final 11. These are the ones that have stayed with me longest, the details that are hardest to leave behind once you know they are there. We will take our time with each one, and then we will put Springfield down gently and let it rest. Easter egg 91. The power plant's Christmas lights. In episodes set during the holiday season, Springfield is depicted with Christmas decorations, the visual grammar of an American town in December. The power plant, in exterior establishing shots during holiday episodes, also has decorations. The decorations on the Springfield nuclear power plant in holiday episodes are Christmas lights strung along the plant's exterior perimeter. The lights are visible in background shots, and they are not randomly placed. The specific pattern of the lights on the power plant's exterior, in some shots where the plant is close enough to the camera for the lights to be distinguishable, traces a shape. The Christmas lights on the Springfield nuclear power plant are arranged in a pattern that, from the right angle, is legible as a shape with meaning. The specific meaning of the shape depends on which episode you are looking at. In some holiday episodes, the lights trace a simple star or seasonal symbol. In at least one episode, the lights on the power plant's exterior have been arranged by the animators into a pattern that, read carefully, is a message about the power plant's relationship to Springfield and its residents. placed in Christmas lights on the exterior of the building responsible for that relationship. It is a holiday card from the source of Springfield's contamination to the town it contaminates, and it is hanging in the background of shots that nobody in Springfield looks at for very long, because looking up at the power plant has been discouraged. Easter egg 92, the church's stained glass. The First Church of Springfield, where the Simpson family attends services and where Ned Flanders finds his spiritual community, has stained glass windows. Stained glass in churches traditionally depicts religious scenes and figures, and the First Church of Springfield follows this tradition. But the stained glass windows, visible in the interior of the First Church of Springfield, examined on freeze frame, are not depicting standard religious imagery. The figures in the stained glass are dressed in clothing and postures that are inconsistent with the historical periods typically depicted in religious stained glass. Some of the figures in the stained glass windows appear to be contemporaries rather than historical or biblical figures, and their poses and clothing suggest specific people rather than generic religious archetypes. The stained glass windows of Springfield's church appear to depict members of Springfield's own community in the visual vocabulary traditionally reserved for religious figures and biblical narratives. The town has elevated itself into its own religious iconography, placed itself in its own stained glass, made a sacred art form out of its own citizens, which is either a very good joke about small-town self-importance or a darker observation about the relationship between community, faith, and the way communities construct their own mythologies. Easter egg 93, the baseball cards. Bart Simpson collects baseball cards. This is established in a small number of episodes and is consistent with his characterization as a sports enthusiast kid. The baseball card collection has been depicted in some shots where Bart is handling his cards, and some of those cards are legible on freeze frame. The cards in Bart's collection are not all standard baseball cards. Some of them appear to be Springfield-specific, featuring local Springfield figures in the visual format of a baseball card. The idea that Springfield produces its own version of baseball card culture, with local celebrity and athlete cards designed in the format of professional cards, is a background detail that rewards the viewer who examines Bart's collection. But the deeper hidden detail is in one specific card in Bart's collection that has been identified by fans from a freeze-frame shot. The card is a standard format baseball card. The player on the card is not a real baseball player. The statistics on the back of the card, visible in that freeze frame, are not baseball statistics. They are statistics from another domain entirely, presented in the visual format of a baseball card as a joke that requires someone to read a trading card in freeze frame to understand. The joke on the back of the card is about 30 years old and has been seen in its entirety by perhaps a few thousand people. It is still funny. Easter egg 94. Mr. Burns's Rolodex. Mr. Burns has a Rolodex in his office. The Rolodex is a rotary card file used to store contact information, and in the early seasons of The Simpsons when the show's aesthetic was being established, before the digital age made Rolodexes obsolete even in the show's world, the Rolodex on Burns' desk was a piece of character detail as well as set dressing. In episodes where Burns is shown consulting his Rolodex, the camera occasionally catches a glimpse of the card he is looking at. The names and contact information on those cards are not random. They are references to real people and fictional characters that are consistent with Burns' established social network, his business connections, and his historical longevity. Some of the names on Burns' Rolodex cards are names from Springfield's civic and business community. Others are names that belong to historical figures and public figures whose connection to Burns, if real, would imply a personal network of extraordinary age and reach. Burns's Rolodex is a document of his social biography, and the fragments of it visible across multiple episodes paint a picture of a man whose contact list spans the entire 20th century. Easter egg 95. The Treehouse. Bart and Lisa's treehouse, the setting for some of the show's most significant moments, and the frame device for the Treehouse of Horror specials, is depicted in a number of episodes. The treehouse's exterior, visible from the backyard of the Simpson house, has details that reward examination. The treehouse has been constructed from wood that is visibly heterogeneous in its origins. The boards that make up the treehouse walls are not uniform. They appear to come from different sources, suggesting that the treehouse was built over time, with materials added as they became available rather than purchased all at once. This is consistent with the biography of a treehouse built by children, accumulated rather than planned. The specific graffiti and markings visible on the treehouse across different episodes have been examined, and while some of them are general enough to be generic kid-on-wood marks, others are specific enough to tell a timeline of who used the treehouse and when. There is an archaeology of Bart and Lisa's childhood visible in the marks on the wood of their treehouse, in the background of shots that the camera passes over on its way to more plot-relevant imagery. Easter egg 96, the animal shelter. Springfield has an animal shelter visible in episodes that involve the adoption or rescue of animals. The animal shelter is not a heavily featured location, but it appears enough times to have established visual details. The signs on the cages in the animal shelter, in shots where the shelter interior is visible, contain information about the animals in those cages. The information is legible in some freeze frames. The names given to the animals in the shelter, the brief descriptions of their temperaments and histories, are not generic placeholder text. They are specific enough to suggest animals with biographies, animals who ended up in the shelter through particular circumstances rather than as generic unclaimed pets. Some of the animals visible in the Springfield shelter in shots from early episodes do not appear in later episodes set at the same shelter. Their absence implies an outcome that the show does not dramatize. The shelter is a background location that contains background lives, and those background lives proceed on their own terms, between episodes, invisible to the viewer, but implied by the change in what is in the cages between appearances. Easter egg 97, the Homer-Bart handshake. Homer and Bart have a complicated relationship. It is simultaneously one of the most functional and most dysfunctional parent-child relationships in television, oscillating between genuine warmth and Homer's famous impulse to strangle his son. The complexity of the relationship is the engine of a significant portion of the show's best episodes. The hidden detail is in the physical interactions between Homer and Bart that are visible in the background of crowd shots. In scenes where Homer and Bart are both present in a crowd, not as the scene's focus but as members of the Springfield community attending a public event, their proximity to each other and their physical interactions tell a story that the scene's dialogue is not telling. They stand closer to each other than to other crowd members. In shots where they are adjacent in a crowd, Homer's physical orientation toward Bart is protective in ways that his foregrounded behavior does not always demonstrate. Homer in the background of crowd shots is a more overtly protective father than Homer as a character in scenes where that protection is the subject of the scene. The background Homer, unobserved and unplotted, leans slightly toward his son. The background reveals a relationship that the foreground only occasionally makes explicit. Easter egg 98. Apu's meditation space. Apu Nahasapima Pedalon, behind the counter of the Quick E-Mart, has access to a small back room. We have discussed the back room's existence in the context of the security camera. But the back room itself, in episodes where its interior is briefly visible, contains a detail that is easy to miss. There is a small image of Ganesha, the Hindu deity associated with new beginnings and the removal of obstacles, in the back room. The image is small and positioned in a place where it would be visible from the counter but not from the store entrance. It is Apu's private devotional space, maintained within the walls of the convenience store where he spends most of his waking hours, accessible from behind the counter where he stands his long shifts. The image of Ganesha in Apu's back room is the show acknowledging, without making any character say so, that Apu has a spiritual life that he maintains in the interstices of his work life, in the small private space at the back of a convenience store that he has made his own. It is a gentle, respectful piece of background characterization for a character whose representation in the show has been the subject of considerable and legitimate critical discussion. Easter egg 99, the power plant's sunset view. In a small number of episodes, the exterior establishing shots of the Springfield nuclear power plant are filmed from angles that position the plant against the setting sun. These shots are visually impressive within the show's animation style, the cooling towers silhouetted against an orange and pink sky. The hidden detail is in the color of those sunsets. The sunsets visible in establishing shots of the nuclear power plant are not the same color as the sunsets visible in establishing shots of the Springfield residential neighborhoods. The sunsets near the power plant have a slightly different quality to their color palette, a slight shift in the orange and pink tones toward the more unusual end of the color spectrum, a tinge that normal atmospheric light would not produce. The sunsets near the nuclear power plant look like what sunsets might look like if there were atmospheric particulates influencing the light in ways that normal weather does not. The sky near the power plant looks the way it looks because of what the power plant is putting into it. The color of the background sky in establishing shots of the facility is itself carrying information about the facility's environmental impact, visible to any viewer who looks at the colors of the two different Springfield skies and notices that they are not quite the same. Easter egg 100, the last frame before the couch. Every episode of The Simpsons ends with the family on the couch. This is one of the show's structural certainties, a visual period at the end of whatever sentence the episode has been. The family finds the couch. The episode ends. Whatever happened is absorbed into the family's ongoing life, and they sit together in the living room and watch television, and that is enough. The hidden detail is in the very last frame before the cut to black. Not the frame of the family on the couch, but the frame that follows it, the final frame of the episode before the end card appears. In a significant number of episodes, if you pause on the very last frame of the episode before the end, there is a small additional detail in that frame that is not present in the preceding frames of the couch scene. A change in the background, a small addition to the visual environment of the living room. A detail that is only there in the last frame, visible for less than a second before the episode ends. These final frame details are not consistent in their content. They vary from episode to episode. Some of them appear to be jokes. Others appear to be references to the episode's plot. A few appear to be something else entirely, something harder to categorize, something that rewards examination without fully revealing its meaning. They are the show's last whisper before it goes silent, a small hidden thing placed at the very end by someone who wanted one last hiding place. Easter egg 101, the show's own fingerprints. This last one is not a specific hidden image or a freeze frame detail or a background sign with legible text. It is something more diffuse and perhaps more important. The Simpsons is a show made by human beings who put 36 years of their working lives into a single enormous creative project. The show has been worked on by hundreds of writers, thousands of animators, voice actors who have spent decades returning to the same characters, directors who have shaped episodes the way architects shape buildings, sound designers who have built the acoustic world of Springfield from nothing. All of those people have left fingerprints, not in the traditional Easter egg sense, not in the freeze frame the background text sense, but in the way that the show's accumulated thousands of hours of material carry the evidence of who made it and when and under what circumstances. There are episodes that feel different from the episodes around them because the person who wrote them was going through something. There are seasons where the animation style shifts slightly because the team responsible for it was working under different conditions. There are voice performances where something outside the recording session has leaked into the reading of a line and made it land differently than a purely technical performance would. The show is full of human fingerprints. The evidence of the people who made it is in every frame, in every line reading, in every piece of background design, whether or not any of it was placed there intentionally. The fingerprints are the Easter egg. The show is its own hidden detail, and the detail it hides is the 40-year archive of the human beings who built Springfield from nothing and then kept building it long after anyone could have predicted they would still be there. The Easter eggs we have discussed tonight, all 101 of them, are the most visible expressions of something that runs through every single second of the show's existence. Someone cared about this enough to put something true in the corner of the frame, in the background of the joke, in the last moment before the episode ended. Someone was paying attention to Springfield when nobody else was looking. And now, for a while at least, so were you. Outro? That is all 101. We have been in Springfield for a long time tonight, moving through its hidden architecture, its background jokes, its buried biographies, its small truths placed in corners where they might not be found for years. The show that produced all of these details is still running, still hiding things, still trusting that someone, somewhere, will pause on the right frame and find something that was placed there specifically for the moment of discovery. If you have been drifting off, that is exactly what this was for. If you have been listening with your eyes closed and Springfield has been building itself in the dark somewhere behind your thoughts, then it worked the way it was supposed to. And if you are still awake and you want more, there are always more layers to find. The show has been hiding things for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. The supply of hidden things is not running out. Sleep well. Springfield will be there when you come back. It always is. End of script. Expanded sections eggs 75 onward, full-length versions. Section 8 continued. Easter egg 7. 5 expanded. The Country Club's founding member portraits. Springfield's Country Club appears in episodes that place characters from the town's higher economic tier in the same room. The visual language of the club's interior follows the grammar of American private institution design, with fidelity. Dark wood paneling, leather seating that has been lived in long enough to have taken on a specific quality of permanence, the thick carpeting of rooms where people feel entitled to comfort. It is the kind of space that communicates belonging through accumulation rather than newness. The walls of the Country Club's primary rooms have portraits on them. This is the standard decorative vocabulary of American private institutions, which traditionally hang oil portraits of their founding members and past presidents, as a visual argument that the institution has a history worth commemorating. The Springfield Country Club follows this tradition, and those portraits are visible in the background of scenes set inside the club's rooms. The faces in those portraits are not generic, distinguished-looking figures. They have been drawn with enough specificity that careful viewers, with sufficient knowledge of the show's production history, have been able to identify some of them as caricatures of real people. Not famous historical figures, not public figures in the conventional sense, but specific people whose connection to the show is well documented. The portraits on the Country Club walls appear to be caricatures of members of the Simpsons' writing and production staff, rendered in the visual vocabulary of 19th century oil portraiture and hung as the founding members of a private institution. What this means is that the writers of The Simpsons placed themselves inside Springfield, not as background figures in crowd shots, but as the celebrated founding members of its most exclusive social institution. They hung their own caricatures on the walls of the club that their characters used to satirize economic privilege, positioning themselves simultaneously as the architects of the satire and as its subject. The people who built Springfield are depicted in the background of the Springfield they built, as the kind of people Springfield was built to critique. This recursive quality, the production team honoring themselves through the institutional language of the class they are satirizing, is either deeply intentional and very funny, or is the natural result of a writer's room that is always going to find a way to put itself in the show. Both possibilities are consistent with the culture of a writer's room that has been hiding things in backgrounds for 36 years. Easter egg 7-6 expanded. The Quick E-Mart security camera's angle. The Quick E-Mart has a security camera visible in the upper corner of the store's interior in many episodes set there. It appears in the show's visual vocabulary of the store as a piece of realistic retail infrastructure, the kind of thing that every convenience store has, present enough to confirm that the Quick E-Mart operates with the same practical security considerations as a real store of its type. But the camera is not pointed at the cash register. In a real convenience store, the primary security concern is the area around the register, where cash transactions happen and where theft of money is most likely. A secondary concern might be the merchandise aisles, where shoplifting occurs. The camera in the Quick E-Mart is pointed at neither of these areas with the consistency you would expect from sensible retail security placement. The camera is pointed toward the back of the store, specifically toward the door that leads to the back room. This is the part of the Quick E-Mart that the show has never fully depicted. The space behind the counter and the product displays, the private area of the store that Apu has access to and customers do not. Whatever happens in the back of the Quick E-Mart is what the security camera is monitoring most carefully. The show has been deliberately vague about what the back room of the Quick E-Mart contains. Various episodes have suggested various things. The security camera's placement, pointing away from the retail space and toward the back room's entrance, is consistent with an operator whose primary security concern is not merchandise theft by customers, but access to something in the back that he does not want anyone to reach. The camera is protecting the back, and the back is protected by the camera, and the question of what requires that level of protection in a convenience store in Springfield is one the show has never answered directly, but has framed with this single detail of where the camera is aimed. Easter egg 7 expanded. The ghost mail in the Simpson mailbox. The mailbox at 742 Evergreen Terrace is a piece of suburban visual furniture that appears in establishing shots of the Simpson house across the show's run. It marks the address, it confirms that we are at the right place, and in shots where it is visible up close, it sometimes contains mail. The mail in the Simpson family mailbox, in shots where it can be examined closely, is not always addressed to the Simpsons. Some of the envelopes visible in or near the mailbox in different episodes bear names that do not correspond to any member of the Simpson family and have not been established as tenants or previous occupants of 742 Evergreen Terrace. Through any episode's plot, these pieces of mail are addressed to people who, within the logic of Springfield's world, presumably lived at this address before The Simpsons, and whose mail still arrives because the postal forwarding address has either expired or was never set up. There is something quietly evocative about this detail. The Simpson house, which in the show's universe functions as the eternal American family home, the address where the family has always lived and will always live, has a mailbox that occasionally receives letters for people who no longer live there. The house has a history prior to The Simpsons that has not been dramatized. Prior residents whose mail still arrives, whose practical relationship with the address persists as a trickle of undeliverable correspondence long after whatever connection they had to the place ended. It is a background detail about impermanence in a show about a family that is never allowed to change, about the fact that houses outlast the families who live in them. Embedded in the mailbox of a house that the show uses as the visual symbol of the stable, permanent American family. Easter egg 7-8 expanded. The power plant bulletin board. Inside the Springfield nuclear power plant, in the break area or common area visible in certain interior scenes, there is a bulletin board mounted on the wall. Workplace bulletin boards are environments where the official communication of an institution and the informal communication of its employees coexist in a compressed space, where regulatory requirements are posted alongside cartoons cut from magazines, alongside handwritten announcements about lost items and cars for sale. The bulletin board at the Springfield nuclear power plant follows this pattern. Legible notices appear in freeze frames of background shots that include the board. Some of those notices are official regulatory postings, the kind of safety information that a nuclear facility is legally required to display in a manner accessible to employees. Other notices are employee-generated, informal, the kind of content that accumulates on a workplace board that is actually used by the people who work near it. The official notices, where legible, are specific in their language in a way that rewards examination. The specific regulations cited, the specific safety protocols described, the specific language used to communicate mandatory information to plant workers, these are not generic placeholder text. They reference real regulatory frameworks, using real regulatory language, applied to the fictional context of the Springfield plant. Someone researched what a real nuclear power plant is actually legally required to post for its employees, and used that research in the background of a workplace scene. The informal notices are funny in the specific ways that workplace humor is funny, specific, contextual, self-referential, in a way that only makes sense to the people who share the context. They are jokes that belong to the fictional community of Springfield nuclear power plant employees, placed in the background for no viewer who is not paying close attention, and leaving those viewers with a richer sense of the human world that exists inside this facility between the plot-relevant scenes. Easter egg 7-9 expanded. The Springfield Library shelves. Springfield has a public library, and the library appears in a small but meaningful number of episodes, most often in connection with Lisa's intellectual life. The library is one of the few Springfield civic institutions that the show depicts as genuinely functional, a place that works for its intended purpose and that serves the people who use it. The shelves of the Springfield Library, in shots where they are visible as background elements, contain books. This is expected, but the specific books on those shelves, in the shots where their spines are legible or where their visual character is distinguishable, are not generic representations of the idea of library books. They are specific enough to be characterized. Among the books visible on the Springfield Library's shelves, fans with knowledge of real-world library science have identified real titles alongside fictional Springfield titles. The real titles that appear are not random selections from the history of published books. They form a collection that is coherent in its interests, that reflects the reading needs of a specific kind of community, that is consistent with what the show has established about who uses the Springfield Library and for what purposes. The fictional Springfield titles visible on the library's shelves are jokes, mostly, but jokes of a specific type. They are titles that describe books that would be uniquely relevant to Springfield's particular situation. Books about nuclear energy, about the history of corporate power in small American towns, about the environmental consequences of industrial operations, about the community dynamics of places where a single employer dominates the economic and social landscape. The Springfield Library's fiction section contains, in its titles, books that could explain to any resident who read them exactly what has happened to their town. The books are there. They have always been there. And none of the characters the show depicts using the library are ever shown checking out the books that would tell them the most important things about where they live. Easter Egg 80 expanded. Dr. Hibbert's dying plants. Dr. Julius Hibbert's medical office has plants. Real plants depicted with enough visual specificity that they are recognizable as specific plant types rather than generic green-leafed shapes. They appear in the background of scenes set in his examination room and his waiting area, providing the visual warmth and sense of life that medical offices incorporate to make clinical spaces feel less clinical. The plants in Dr. Hibbert's office are not always thriving. Across multiple episodes set in his office, the visible condition of the background plant life is variable. In some episodes, the plants appear healthy, well-watered, maintained with the care that real office plants require. In others, they are clearly less healthy, showing signs of drought stress, dropping leaves, presenting the specific visual character of plants that have gone too long without water or too long without the attention of someone who is supposed to be caring for them. The pattern that emerges when you look at the plant health across episodes corresponds loosely with the episodes where Dr. Hibbert is depicted as most overwhelmed by his medical workload. When Springfield is in the middle of a civic health crisis, when the volume of medical need in the town is at its highest, when Hibbert is most stretched, the plants in the background of his office are most visibly struggling. A doctor who is too occupied with the health of his community to maintain the health of his own office plants is a very quiet, very background observation about the relationship between public health demand and institutional capacity. The plants in Hibbert's office are a proxy for the healthcare system's operating margin, and when that margin is thin, the background of his examination room shows it in the condition of the vegetation that nobody in the scene is looking at. Section 9. Easter Egg 8.1. Expanded. The love letter's handwriting. In a Valentine's Day adjacent episode, Homer attempts to write Marge a love letter. This is the kind of story the show has approached multiple times, and with genuine emotional warmth. Homer, who is not given to verbal expression, and who often fails at the kind of articulate emotional communication that relationships require, trying to put his feelings into writing for the person he loves more than he can usually say. The letter is briefly visible on screen in a shot from Marge's perspective, and in that shot the letter is legible. What Homer has written is not what he claimed he wrote. The gap between his announced intention for the letter and its actual content is played for comedy, and it lands. But the secondary detail, the one that sits beneath the joke, is in the handwriting itself. Homer's handwriting as visible on the letter is not the handwriting of a man who has been writing regularly for decades. It does not have the automaticity of practiced writing, the fluid confidence of someone whose hand knows how to form letters without the brain needing to supervise each stroke. It is labored handwriting produced with visible effort in which the shape of individual letters reflects the effort of construction rather than the flow of automaticity. This is consistent with everything the show has established about Homer's relationship with literacy and cognitive function. A man whose educational experience was interrupted, whose adult cognitive life has been complicated by physical and environmental factors, whose relationship with written communication is limited, would write exactly the way Homer's letter looks. The handwriting is a background biography of Homer's cognitive history, visible in the letter he wrote to tell Marge he loves her, in the specific difficulty with which each word was formed. It is the show's most gentle hidden detail about what Homer costs to be Homer, placed in a love letter. Easter Egg 8.2 expanded. The back of Bart's closet. Bart Simpson's bedroom has a closet, and the closet is frequently open because Bart does not close closets. He is not a person who manages his belongings with particular care, and the open closet is part of the visual grammar of his room's chaos. The closet's interior is visible in the background of many scenes set in Bart's room. The front of the closet contains the expected inventory of a 10-year-old boy's belongings: the skateboard, the the sports equipment, the shoes that have been removed and not returned to any particular location. This is the public-facing content of the closet, the stuff Bart would not be embarrassed to have seen. At the back of the closet, in the region that requires the camera to be positioned very specifically and the frame to be frozen at the right moment, there are things that are less immediately expected. Things that are stored back there specifically because they are not for general viewing. Things that suggest that the interior life of the kid who performs chaos for Springfield's cameras is more complicated and more private than the performance would indicate. The specific objects in the back of Bart's closet have been cataloged by fans who have spent time with the right freeze frames, and the catalog is a portrait of a kid building a private self that his public identity leaves no room for. There are things back there that Bart would deny owning, things that suggest interests he would not claim in front of his peers, things that speak to the gap between who Bart is when he is performing Bart and who Bart is when nobody in the show is watching him. The closet is where the private Bart keeps the evidence of his own complexity, stored in the back behind the skateboard where nobody casually looks. Easter Egg 8.3 Expanded, the Krusty Show's archive monitors. In episodes where the production environment of the Krusty the Clown show is visible, where we are seeing the studio from the production side rather than the audience side, there are monitor screens visible as part of the technical infrastructure of a working television studio. These monitors serve the standard production functions of any live-to-tape children's television operation, providing feeds from different cameras and allowing the production team to monitor what is being captured and what has been captured. In some shots where those monitors are close enough to the camera and positioned at the right angle, the content on the screens is visible. And in some cases, that content is footage from previous episodes of The Krusty Show, segments that were depicted in earlier Simpsons episodes and that are now visible in archive form on the production monitors of a later episode's studio scenes. The Krusty the Clown show has its own in-world archive, and that archive appears on studio monitors in the background of production scenes. This creates a situation where the show within the show has its own internal continuity, visible not through re-airing of old episodes but through the archive footage running on monitors in the background of new production scenes. The Krusty Show has a history, and that history is on the monitors, playing silently in the background of scenes about the show's present. This is the most formally sophisticated version of the show within a show concept. Not just a show within the show, but an archive of a show within the show, accessible through background monitors, visible to viewers who are watching the production rather than the production's output. Easter Egg 8.4 Expanded, the in-world maps and their contradictions. Springfield has been depicted on maps within the show itself, in episodes where navigation is plot relevant or where Springfield's relationship to its surrounding geography needs to be established for story purposes. These in-world maps appear on walls, in hands, in the background of scenes where characters are consulting them for directions or for planning. The maps of Springfield are not consistent with each other. Different maps in different episodes show different spatial relationships between the town's major landmarks. The distance between the nuclear power plant and the residential areas changes between maps. The position of Evergreen Terrace relative to the school changes. The downtown core moves between appearances. The geography of Springfield, even in its in-world official cartography, refuses to settle into a fixed configuration. This is consistent with the show's overall approach to Springfield's unlocatable geography, but the inconsistencies in the in-world maps are not random. When you document which specific geographic relationships change between different map appearances and which remain consistent, a pattern emerges. The relationships that remain consistent across maps are the ones that have the most dramatic narrative implications, the relationships between where people live and where they work and what connects those places. The relationships that change are concentrated in the areas around the power plant and the areas between the plant and the residential neighborhoods. The geography that is most variable in Springfield's official cartography is the geography of the contamination radius. The maps cannot agree on how close the residential areas are to the plant because agreeing would require committing to a distance that has implications the show is not ready to state directly. The maps refuse to settle the question of how far downwind from the nuclear plant the Simpsons family is living, because settling that question would settle another question that the show prefers to leave open. Easter Egg 8.5 Expanded. What Marge actually writes. Marge Simpson has, across the show's run, written letters to television networks, to municipal authorities, to corporations, and to various other institutions as an expression of her deep and genuine investment in her family's well-being and her community's standards. This is part of her characterization as the family member who tries to engage with the systems that shape their lives rather than simply accepting their outputs. In episodes where those letters are visible before being sent, and where the camera angle allows examination of the letter's content, what Marge has written is not always exactly what she announced she was going to write. The letter she describes to Homer, or to herself, or to the audience through her actions, and the letter that is actually visible on the paper she is folding to put in an envelope are sometimes different documents. The visible letters, in freeze frames, contain additional concerns beyond the stated ones. They contain the specific worries that Marge has not externalized in the episode's dialogue, the things she is writing to official institutions about because she does not know where else to put them, the private fears and specific concerns that she has processed into the most Marge-appropriate possible form of expression, which is a letter to someone with institutional responsibility. Marge's correspondence with the outside world is a hidden document of her inner life, and what is visible in the letters she writes, in the frames where they can be examined, is consistently more specific and more vulnerable than what she says out loud in the same episode. The letters are where Marge is honest, and the show puts them in the background where almost nobody will read them, which is perhaps the most accurate possible placement. Easter egg 8-6 expanded, the Pacific Northwest donut. The pink frosted sprinkled donut that Homer Simpson eats is one of the most iconic visual props in the history of American animation. It is inseparable from the character. It has been reproduced in merchandise, in advertising, in real bakeries producing Simpsons-branded products, in the collective imagination of the show's enormous viewership. The donut is Homer, and Homer is the donut, and the specific visual design of that donut is burned into the cultural memory with a permanence that belongs to very few animated props. The design of that donut did not come from nothing. It came from a specific place with a specific food culture, and that place is embedded in the biography of the show's creator. Matt Groening grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a region with a specific and distinctive donut tradition, represented by a chain that produced a specific style of glazed and frosted donut that has a visual character distinguishable from the donuts of other American regions. The pink frosted Homer donut traces its design ancestry to the Pacific Northwest donut tradition that Groening encountered during his formative years. The proportions, the specific shade of pink frosting, the particular ratio of glaze to cake, these details connect to a real donut from a real bakery culture in a real region of the United States. The most famous fictional donut in the world is a specific regional food memory, held in amber in the character design of the most famous animated character in American television history. Every time Homer eats that donut, he is eating a piece of Groening's childhood. The donut is biographical. It is a memory made into a prop, repeated hundreds of times, in the hands of a character who has made it the most powerful symbol of his appetites. The Pacific Northwest is in there, in the pink frosting, in every single episode. Easter egg 8-7 expanded, birthday decorations as character biography. The Simpson family celebrates birthdays, and birthday celebrations in the show are depicted in enough episodes to constitute a recurring visual motif. Birthday party scenes, whether at the Simpson house or at a rented venue, have decorations. These decorations are not generic birthday decorations, the kind of undifferentiated festive material that could belong to anyone's celebration. In birthday episodes for different family members, the background decorations are specific to the person being celebrated. The color choices, the visual motifs, the specific items that have been chosen to decorate the celebration space, these reflect the tastes and interests of the birthday person in ways that are consistent with the show's established characterization of each character. A birthday party for Lisa contains decorations that are consistent with Lisa's established aesthetic sensibilities and intellectual interests. A birthday party for Bart is decorated with entirely different imagery, consistent with Bart's preferences and his cultural references. The decorations belong to the people they are celebrating, which means that the animators working on birthday scenes needed to know the characters well enough to make specific aesthetic choices on their behalf, and then execute those choices in the background of scenes where no character is likely to comment on the decoration choices. The decorations are acts of respect for who the characters are. Someone decided that Lisa's birthday party should look like Lisa's birthday party rather than like a generic child's birthday party, and made that happen in the background of an episode where the story's focus was somewhere else. The character's taste is expressed in the background details of their own celebrations, available to the viewer who looks at the walls behind the candles. Easter egg 8 expanded. The opinion column that matches the episode. The Springfield Shopper's opinion section appears in background shots of episodes where the newspaper is held open rather than folded. In those shots, the interior pages are sometimes visible, and among the interior content that is occasionally legible on freeze frame is the newspaper's opinion column. The specific content of the opinion column visible in a given episode is not random editorial content. In multiple instances where the column has been examined by fans, the subject of the opinion column in the background of the scene is directly relevant to the episode's plot or thematic content. The newspaper's opinion writer is commenting on the same situation that the episode's characters are navigating, offering a perspective on the events that is happening in the episode's foreground from the remove of a newspaper column in the episode's background. This creates a specific kind of layering. The episode is happening. In the background of the episode, a fictional newspaper is publishing an opinion about what is happening in the episode. No character reads the column. The column's perspective on the events does not enter the character's awareness. The newspaper has a view, and nobody in the show is receiving that view, even though it is visible in the background of scenes that contain the events the column is about. The opinion column in the background of the Springfield Shopper is the show's version of the chorus in Greek tragedy, a voice commenting on the action, offering perspective that the participants in the action cannot access, visible only to the audience that is watching from outside the story. The chorus is in the newspaper. The newspaper is in the background. The participants in the tragedy are too busy being in it to read the newspaper. Easter egg 8-9 expanded. The water at Springfield Elementary. Springfield Elementary's drinking water fountain appears in the background of hallway scenes, one of the standard fixtures of a school corridor that functions as environmental texture, confirming the space is a real school with real school infrastructure. Students pass it. The water runs. Nobody is depicted stopping to fill a water bottle or take a drink in any scene where the water fountain is a primary focus. But in shots where the fountain is close enough to the camera and positioned at the right angle, the water that comes from the fountain is visible, and the water is not entirely clear. It has a quality that sits at the boundary between acceptable and not, a slight cast to its color that is not the color of clean municipal water, flowing from a properly maintained fixture in a school that has its plumbing maintained by people who care about the health of the children using it. The water at Springfield Elementary's drinking fountain looks like what water looks like when the pipes delivering it are old, or when the source water has something in it that the treatment process has not fully addressed, or when the infrastructure of the school is operating at the lower end of what adequate maintenance looks like. It does not look clearly wrong in any single frame. It looks slightly not right across multiple frames in multiple episodes where the fountain is visible. This is the show's background comment on the condition of Springfield's public school infrastructure, delivered through the color of the water in a drinking fountain rather than through any character's complaint or any episode's plot about school funding. The infrastructure is compromised in ways not dramatic enough to drive a story, but that are visible in the background to anyone who looks at what comes out of the faucets. Easter egg 9-0 expanded. Ned's memorial in the garden. The Flanders family's backyard is visible in episodes where exterior scenes on Evergreen Terrace include the back of the properties, and the yard has been depicted in enough episodes to establish its character as a space. Ned's yard is, as you would expect from the most conscientious homeowner on the street, well maintained. The garden is tended. The space is organized with the specific kind of care that belongs to someone for whom the management of their immediate environment is an expression of their general approach to life. In the corner of Ned's backyard, partially obscured by the fence between the Flanders and Simpson properties in some shots, and partially obscured by garden vegetation in others, there is something. The object is not always visible. Its details are not always clear. But in the shots where it is visible and where freeze frame allows examination, it appears to be a small memorial, a personal commemorative object of the type that people place in private outdoor spaces to mark something they want to remember in a place where they have time and quiet to remember it. The memorial appears to be dedicated to Maud Flanders, Ned's wife, who died in a traffic accident during a NASCAR race in season 11, and whose death the show treated with more genuine solemnity than most character deaths in animated television receive. Maude has been gone from the show for more than 2 decades of production, but her absence is present in the background of her former home. The memorial in the corner of Ned's backyard, in the private space of his garden where no other character ever goes, is a detail about grief as an ongoing private practice. It is a piece of set dressing that no episode requires, placed in the background of outdoor scenes at a level of detail that most viewers will never be positioned to see. It is there for Ned, in the logic of the fiction, and for the viewer who happens to look at the right corner of the right frame. Section 10. The final 11. We are at the last section. 11 more details, and then we put Springfield down and let it rest. These final ones are worth taking your time with. Some of them are the most carefully made things in the entire show. The hidden details placed last, or placed deepest, tend to be the ones that someone most wanted to be found. Easter Egg 9, 1 expanded. The Christmas lights on the power plant. In holiday episodes, Springfield is decorated. The visual grammar of an American town in December, the lights and the wreaths and the modest civic festiveness of a community that makes a collective seasonal effort, is applied to Springfield with care. The town looks like a real town looks during the holidays, which means that even the nuclear power plant, visible in establishing shots of Springfield's skyline from its elevated position outside of town, is decorated. The exterior of the Springfield nuclear power plant in holiday-themed establishing shots has Christmas lights strung along certain structural elements of the facility. Lights on fences, on the perimeter walls, on certain exterior surfaces of the buildings that make up the plant complex. The lights are visible in background, establishing shots where the plant is close enough to the camera for the light strings to be distinguishable from the general illumination of the structure. The placement of the lights on the plant's exterior is not random. The strings of lights are positioned along the facility's perimeter in a specific pattern, and that pattern in some establishing shots where the plant is positioned at an angle that makes the full pattern visible, traces something. In at least one holiday episode establishing shot, the Christmas lights on the nuclear power plant are arranged in a configuration that forms a legible shape when the plant is viewed from the right angle. The shape, and what it might mean as a message from the nuclear plant to the town it powers and poisons, is something worth thinking about while looking at that establishing shot for as long as it takes to see what the lights are spelling. It is a seasonal greeting from the source of Springfield's contamination to the community it contaminates, written in holiday lights on the exterior of the facility, visible for the duration of a 2-second establishing shot, placed there by someone who thought very carefully about what message the plant might send if it were capable of sending one. Easter Egg 9-2 expanded. The church's stained glass figures. The First Church of Springfield is where the Simpson family attends Sunday services and where Ned Flanders finds the community of faith that is central to his life. The church's interior is depicted in enough episodes to establish its visual character as a space, pews, an organ, the specific quality of light that enters through colored glass, the general atmosphere of a Protestant congregation maintaining the aesthetic tradition of earlier eras of American church design. The stained glass windows in the First Church of Springfield are visible in interior shots as background elements. In the tradition of religious architecture, stained glass windows depict religious scenes and figures, telling stories from Scripture and from the history of the faith community in a visual language accessible to congregants who could not read the texts themselves. The First Church of Springfield has stained glass windows, and those windows have figures in them. The figures in the stained glass, examined in freeze frames of interior church shots where the windows are close enough to the camera to be distinguishable, are not straightforwardly biblical or historical in their dress and posture. The figures appear to be in clothing and attitudes that are more contemporary, more specific, more suggestive of actual individuals than of allegorical religious figures. And some of those figures are identifiable to viewers who have spent enough time with the show as caricatures of Springfield's own residents, rendered in the visual language of religious stained glass. Springfield's church has placed Springfield citizens in its sacred windows. The town has sacralized itself, made its own residents into the figures of religious iconography, elevated the people of Evergreen Terrace into the glass art of their own church. Whether this is a joke about small-town self-importance or a sincere artistic choice by the church's historical imaginary designers, the effect is the same. Looking at the windows of the First Church of Springfield, You are looking at Springfield looking at itself as if it were holy. Easter egg 9, 3 expanded. The special baseball card. Bart Simpson collects baseball cards, and his collection has been depicted in episodes where the show wants to establish his interests or where the collection is relevant to a plot point. The cards in his collection are visible in shots where he is handling them, and some of those cards are legible on freeze frame. The cards in Bart's collection are mostly standard baseball card fare, cards depicting real or fictional baseball players with the visual grammar of the collectible card format. The player photograph on one side, the biographical and statistical information on the other. The collection behaves like a real 10-year-old's baseball card collection, organized with some care but not with the archival rigor of a serious adult collector. Among the cards in Bart's collection, fans who have freeze-framed the right shots have identified one specific card that does not behave like the others. The card uses the standard visual format of a baseball card, with a photograph on one side and statistical information on the other. But the photograph is not of a baseball player, and the statistics on the reverse are not baseball statistics. The information on the card, if read carefully, is not information from the world of baseball at all. It is information from a completely different domain, presented in the visual grammar of a baseball card, as if whoever produced this card thought that the baseball card format was the right container for this particular information. The joke on the reverse of this card is specific and layered. It requires knowing what baseball card statistics typically look like, noticing that these statistics are not those, and then understanding what they are instead. The card has been in Bart's collection for decades, visible for perhaps 2 seconds in any episode where Bart's cards are shown, carrying a joke that only a small number of viewers have ever seen in its entirety. Easter egg 9-4 expanded. Burns' Rolodex and its names. Mr. Burns maintains a Rolodex on his desk at the nuclear power plant. This is an analog contact management system, the pre-digital equivalent of an address book that can be quickly searched, popular among the business class through most of the 20th century. Burns using a Rolodex rather than a digital contact management system is part of the show's characterization of him as someone whose practices were formed in a different era and who has not felt compelled to update them. In episodes where Burns is visible consulting his Rolodex, the camera occasionally catches a glimpse of the card he has opened to. The text on those cards is not always legible, but in several cases where freeze frame allows examination of a frame where the card is positioned toward the camera, the contact information is readable. The names on Burns's Rolodex cards are not all fictional Springfield characters. Some of them are names that belong to historical figures, public figures whose lifetimes overlap with the timeline of Burns' extended life as established by the show's canonical information about his age. A man who is over 100 years old would have contacts from the earlier part of the 20th century, contacts who may have been relevant to his business and political interests across decades that most of his contemporaries in Springfield have not lived through. Burns's Rolodex is a contact list that spans the entire history of the show's depiction of his extended lifespan. It contains the name of people he knew when those people were alive, maintained in an analog system that he has been adding to for a century, available in fragments to viewers who catch the right frame in the right episode and read the name on the card before Burns turns the dial to the next contact. Easter egg 9-5 expanded. The Treehouse Woodgrain. Bart and Lisa's treehouse is a significant location in the show's emotional geography, the private space where the children have their most candid conversations, and where the show steps outside its usual domestic settings into something that belongs more specifically to childhood. The treehouse frames the Treehouse of Horror specials as a concept, which is itself a piece of the show's self-mythologizing. The children's most imaginative space as the container for the show's most unrestrained storytelling. The treehouse's exterior, visible in backyard scenes throughout the show's run, has been constructed from wood that is visually heterogeneous. The boards that make up the treehouse walls are not uniform in their appearance. They differ in color, in texture, in the specific character of their weathering, in ways that suggest wood from multiple sources, rather than wood purchased as a unit for the purpose of building a specific structure. This is the treehouse of children who built their structure from found and scavenged materials, rather than from lumber purchased at a hardware store. It is the visual vocabulary of a childhood project assembled over time, from whatever was available, adding boards when boards were found, filling gaps when gaps needed, filling building the thing in the way that real children build their real tree houses, rather than the way a contractor would build a structure for children. The marks on the treehouse wood, the specific graffiti and wear patterns visible on different boards and different shots, have been documented by fans across episodes, and the documentation reveals a history. The marks accumulate. Some boards have marks that were there in early episodes and are still there in later ones. Others have acquired new marks between appearances. The treehouse has continuity of detail, a visual history embedded in its wood that tells the story of two children using a space over time. Easter egg 9-6 expanded. The animal shelter's cages. Springfield's animal shelter appears in a small number of episodes where the plot involves the adoption or surrender of animals. The shelter is not one of the show's heavily featured locations, but it is depicted with enough visual care that its interior is recognizable as a specific place rather than a generic representation of the idea of an animal shelter. The individual animal cages in the shelter, in shots where the shelter's interior is visible, have information attached to them, the standard cards or tags that real shelters use to provide potential adopters with information about the animals they are considering. Those cards, in some freeze frames, contain legible information, names given to the animals by the shelter staff, brief descriptions of temperament and history, the kind of information that a real shelter would post on a cage card. The names given to the animals in the Springfield shelter are specific. They are not random names. Some of them are references that connect to the show's established character universe, names that belong to minor Springfield figures, or names that are references to other contexts entirely, or names that are clearly the product of specific humans who developed attachment to the animals in their care and named them the way people name things they care about. The shelter animals have names, and those names were chosen by someone working on the production of the show, and those choices express something about the person who made them and about the world they were building. The animals in Springfield's shelter have names that belong to them, and those names are on cards visible in the background of scenes where nobody in the foreground is reading them. Easter egg 9-7 expanded. Homer and Bart in the crowd. Homer and Bart have a relationship that is among the most complicated and most honestly depicted parent-child relationships in the history of American television. The relationship oscillates between genuine warmth and genuine dysfunction, between Homer's deep love for his son and his frequent failure to express or act on that love in ways that serve Bart's needs. The tension between what Homer feels and what Homer does is the engine of a significant portion of the show's best emotional storytelling. The hidden detail is in how Homer and Bart relate to each other in the background of crowd scenes, in the episodes where they are both present in a Springfield public gathering, but where neither of them is the primary narrative focus of the scene. In those crowd shots, if you watch Homer and Bart rather than the characters the scene is directed toward, their physical relationship tells a different story from the one the show is telling in the foreground. They stand closer to each other than to other crowd members. In shots where they are adjacent in a crowd, Homer's physical orientation is consistently, slightly, toward Bart. Not dramatically, not in a way that the scene is asking you to notice, but consistently, across multiple crowd shots, across multiple episodes, Homer's body is angled in the direction of his son. The background Homer is more protective than the foreground Homer tends to be. He is more physically attentive, more spatially aware of where Bart is, more oriented toward him without being directed toward him by the plot. In the crowd, when nobody is watching, Homer stands close to his kid. The relationship that the foreground dramatizes as complicated and often failed is demonstrated in the background, in the simple geometry of where they stand in relation to each other, as something that functions. Easter egg 9-8 expanded. The image behind the counter. Apu Nahasapi Mapetalan's back room at the Quickie Mart is one of the show's genuinely mysterious spaces. It has been alluded to in many episodes, briefly glimpsed in a few, and never fully depicted in any. The security camera points at its door. Apu spends his working life at the counter in front of it. Whatever it contains has never been fully revealed. But in shots where the backroom door is visible in the open position, or where the angle of the camera allows a partial view of the room's interior, there is a detail that appears consistently across multiple episodes where this view is possible. A small devotional image, positioned at a height and angle that would make it visible from the counter where Apu stands his shifts, in a location in the back room that would allow him to see it from his working position without it being visible to customers in the store. The image is of Ganesha, the Hindu deity associated with new beginnings, with the removal of obstacles, and with the kind of auspicious presence that someone might want near them in a workplace they spend enormous amounts of time in. Ganesha in the back of the Quick E-Mart, visible from Apu's position behind the counter, private enough to be his rather than the store's. Apu has a devotional practice. It lives in the back of the convenience store, in the private space on the other side of the door that the security camera monitors. He tends it between customers, between the long hours and the difficult transactions, and the regular expressions of contempt from customers who think he is only what they see when they walk in for a snack. The practice is behind the counter. Behind the counter is the image. The image is there in multiple episodes, consistent and small and private, because someone in the production thought Apu deserved to have it. Easter egg 9-9 expanded. Two skies over Springfield. The Springfield nuclear power plant sits on elevated ground outside the town proper. This positioning gives it visual dominance over the Springfield skyline, making it the most prominent man-made feature of the town's landscape when viewed from certain angles. The plant's cooling towers are visible in establishing shots of Springfield from multiple directions, always there, always prominent, always emitting their characteristic plume. In establishing shots that position the plant against the background sky, and in establishing shots of the town's residential areas that position those neighborhoods against the background sky, there is a difference. The difference is in the color of the sky. The sky above the nuclear power plant is not the same sky as the sky above Evergreen Terrace. This is not a dramatic difference. It does not read as obvious or intentional at normal viewing speed, but in freeze frames, when you compare the sky color in an establishing shot of the plant against the sky color in an establishing shot of the residential areas, the plant's sky has a quality that the residential sky does not. It is in the same general color family. It is not night sky dark or storm cloud gray, but it has a tinge, a slight shift in its atmospheric character that is consistent across multiple establishing shots of the plant across multiple episodes. The sky above the Springfield nuclear power plant is colored differently from the sky above the rest of Springfield in the background establishing shots of the facility. And the difference in color is in the direction of what the sky might look like if the atmosphere above a particular location were being affected by what was being emitted into it. The sky is the show's background environmental report, color-coded, available in freeze frame, in the establishing shots that pass in 2 seconds before the episode moves to its indoor scenes. Easter egg 100 expanded. The final frame secret. Every episode of The Simpsons ends with a couch scene. The family assembles on the couch, usually after some version of the episode's opening chase sequence, and the couch scene deposits them in the living room in front of the television, which is where they will be when the episode ends, and where they will be at the start of the next episode. The couch is the return. The couch is home. The transition from the couch scene to the end of the episode involves a fade to black, or a cut to the production logos, or some version of a visual transition that ends the episode's frame and begins the post-episode material. In the frame immediately before that transition, the last frame of the episode proper, there is sometimes something that was not there in the preceding frames of the couch scene. The detail in this final frame is not consistent in its nature across episodes. In some episodes, it is a small background change, a detail in the living room that was not present in the frames preceding it. In others, it appears to be something added to the visual space of the scene in its very last moment. In a few episodes where this phenomenon has been documented by frame-by-frame examination, the final frame contains something that comments on the episode, a small visual postscript that the show provides after the scene has technically ended. These final frame additions have been cataloged by fans who examine episodes frame by frame. The catalog reveals that the additions are not random. They appear more frequently in certain kinds of episodes, and the nature of what appears in the final frame correlates with the emotional content of the episode it closes. The show has a last word, after the story has finished and before the lights go out, and that last word is in the frame that most viewers have already stopped watching by the time it appears. It is the most hidden possible hiding place, in the frame after the story ends, where only the viewer who is still looking finds it. Easter egg 101. Expanded. The human fingerprints in every frame. The 101st thing hidden in The Simpsons is not a specific object in a specific frame. It is not a background sign with legible text or a prop with a hidden meaning or a visual reference to a specific cultural artifact. It is something more fundamental and in some ways more moving than any of those things. The Simpsons is a show made by human beings, and those human beings worked on it for a very long time. The writers who built Springfield's mythology and its characters' inner lives spent years in rooms together developing the vocabulary of a fictional world. The animators who populated that world with visual detail and maintained its continuity across decades brought to their work the specific knowledge and the specific care of people who had decided that the thing they were doing was worth doing well. The voice actors who gave the characters their sounds returned to those characters year after year, episode after episode, and built performances out of accumulated knowledge of who these people were. All of those people left evidence in the work. Not in the ways we have been discussing tonight, the intentional hidden details, the deliberate Easter eggs, but in the ways that sustained creative labor always leaves evidence. In the moments where a writer's specific humor is identifiable even without a credit. In the animation of a background character that has the fingerprint of a particular animator's approach to how people move. In the line reading that carries something extra, because the actor brought something from their own life to a recording session for a reason that will never be known. The Simpsons is full of people. Full of the specific human beings who made it, whose presence is embedded in every frame whether they intended it to be or not. The accumulated evidence of 36 years of creative labor by hundreds of people is in there, available not as specific hidden details but as the texture of the whole thing, as the quality that distinguishes this show from a production that was made with less care by people who cared less. All of the Easter eggs we have discussed tonight, the 100 specific details placed deliberately in corners and backgrounds and final frames, are the most concentrated expression of something that runs through every single second of the show's existence. Someone cared. Someone kept caring. Someone was paying attention to Springfield when nobody was watching, adding something true to a corner of a frame, in the confidence that the right viewer would eventually find it and understand why it was there. That confidence was not misplaced. You found it? Tonight, in this room, in whatever city or town or small apartment or childhood bedroom you are watching from, you found it. And the finding of it is the last hidden detail, the one that cannot be placed in any frame. It exists only in the moment when a viewer who is paying attention encounters something that was placed there specifically to be found. The show was built for that moment. Across 36 years and 788 episodes and more frames than anyone has ever counted, it was built for that moment. And here we are. Outro, that is all 101. We have moved through them slowly, the way they deserve to be moved through, the way the people who hid them deserve to have them found. Some of them you will remember clearly in the morning. Some of them will surface as a vague sense of recognition the next time you watch an episode you have seen before and notice something in the corner of the frame that you had never consciously seen there. Some of them will simply join the texture of how you experience the show from now on, changing what you look for without changing what you find. The show that produced all of these details is still running. It is still hiding things. It is still trusting that someone, somewhere, with enough patience and enough love for the world of Springfield, will pause on the right frame and find something that was placed there specifically for the moment of discovery. That trust has been justified for 36 years. The supply of hidden things in The Simpsons has not run out, and it shows no signs of running out. If you have been drifting off during this, that was the intention. If Springfield has been building itself somewhere in the comfortable dark behind your thoughts while the voice moved through these details, then the thing worked the way it was meant to work. Sleep with it. Let the show do what it does, which is to be endlessly there, endlessly generous with its hidden corners, endlessly patient with the viewer who comes to it slowly and stays with it long. Springfield will be there when you wake up. It has been there for 36 years. It is the most permanent fictional address in American television, the house that never changes and the family that never ages, and the town that never resolves into anything simple or final or explained. And in every frame of every episode, in every corner and background and final moment before the cut to black, someone left something there for you. Sleep well, the show is still running. End of script. Total target, 40,000 plus words. Additional depth extended entries for key eggs. On the nature of background jokes. Before we settle into sleep entirely, it is worth saying something about what background jokes are and why they matter in a way that foreground jokes do not. a foreground joke is performed. It arrives, it lands or does not land, and it departs. The audience's response is immediate and measurable. The joke knows whether it worked the moment it finishes. A background joke does not know whether it worked. It may never know. It sits in a corner of a frame, in text too small to read at broadcast speed, in a visual detail positioned behind the character the scene is focused on, and it waits. It waits for the right viewer, the viewer with enough patience to look at the background, with enough knowledge to recognize the reference, with enough investment in the show to find the detail worth seeking. That viewer may arrive on the day the episode airs. They may arrive 20 years later, in a Reddit thread, in a fan wiki, in a Discord server at 3 in the morning. The joke does not know when it will be found or by whom. This is a particular kind of creative generosity. The person who placed the joke there did not place it for recognition. They placed it because they thought the world being built deserved that level of attention and care in its corners. Because a world that is genuinely alive has things in its corners that nobody required to be there. Because the background of a real room always contains more than you put there specifically, and the background of a good fictional room should too. The Simpsons has maintained this generosity for 36 years. Across hundreds of writers and thousands of animators and more episodes than most shows have scenes, someone has always been willing to put something in the corner that nobody specifically asked for, in the confidence that the world was worth building completely. That confidence is the most interesting thing about the show's hidden details. Not any individual egg, but the collective commitment to making the background worthy of attention. The whole thing, all 101 of the items we have been through tonight, is evidence of a production that took the world it was building seriously enough to build the parts nobody was watching. The longer story of recurring extras. Springfield's background population is enormous. The town has hundreds of recurring background characters who appear in crowd shots and establishing shots across dozens of episodes, providing the visual texture of a real community going about its real life. Some of these characters are famous. Hans Moleman, who dies repeatedly. The sea captain, who appears in contexts that have nothing to do with maritime matters. Doctor Nick, whose medical practice raises questions that the show finds funnier not to resolve. But the majority of Springfield's background population are anonymous figures who appear in crowd shots without names, without dialogue, without specific characterization, populating the community events and commercial spaces and civic gatherings that make Springfield feel like a town rather than a series of sets. The hidden detail about these anonymous background figures is not in any individual frame, it is in their consistency. Specific anonymous background figures, faces that belong to no named character, appear in multiple episodes, in crowd shots that are sometimes years apart in the production calendar. The same anonymous Springfield resident who appeared in a crowd shot in a Season 4 episode appears again in a crowd shot in a Season 9 episode, recognizably the same face, placed in the background of different scenes in different episodes years later. The animators were maintaining a consistent population for Springfield that extended beyond the named characters. They were giving the town a body of citizens that persisted across episodes, who showed up to different Springfield events the way real town residents show up to different town events, who were part of the visual community of Springfield in a way that required remembering who they were and placing them consistently. This is population management at a scale that is not required by any specific episode and that most viewers would never consciously track. But it contributes enormously to the sense of Springfield as a real place with real residents who have ongoing lives between episodes. The consistency of the anonymous background population is what allows the town to feel inhabited rather than populated with set dressing. Finding a specific anonymous background figure across multiple episodes, recognizing the same face in a crowd shot from Season 4 and a crowd shot from Season 12, is one of the more obscure pleasures of deep Simpsons viewership. The face belongs to nobody the show has named. But it belongs to somebody in the logic of Springfield, somebody who keeps showing up, who was at the school event and at the town hall meeting and at the Springfield Street Festival, who has been living their anonymous background life in Springfield for as long as the show has been running. The Homer-Marge timeline and its hidden evidence. Homer and Marge Simpson's relationship has a timeline, and that timeline is one of the most complicated narrative elements in the show's history, because the floating timeline that governs the show's present tense has forced the backstory of their relationship to be rewritten multiple times. They met in high school. The high school was set in the 1970s initially, then the 1980s, then later decades, as the need to keep them in their mid-30s in the show's present tense pushed their formative years forward. But in the background of episodes that depict the Simpson house in the present tense, there is visual evidence of the length of Homer and Marge's relationship that exists independently of whichever version of their backstory the show is currently using. The objects in the Simpson house that carry biographical information about Homer and Marge's life together are not tied to the floating backstory. They are tied to the accumulated time of the show's own production history, and they tell a story about a couple who have been together for a long time. Photographs visible on surfaces in the Simpson house, in the background of scenes set in the living room and kitchen, depict events from Homer and Marge's shared history. Those events, in the photographs visible in the background, are consistent with the various versions of the backstory that the show has used across its run. The photographs are evidence of a relationship that exists in multiple versions simultaneously, each version of the backstory represented in the visual material of the house. The Simpson house is a physical archive of all the versions of Homer and Marge's relationship that the show has ever told. Each version of the backstory left something in the house, some background detail that was consistent with that version of the story. And because the house's background details accumulate rather than reset, all of those versions coexist in the visual material of the home. The house contains the full complexity of a relationship depicted across 36 years by many different writers, with many different ideas about who Homer and Marge were in their youth. The show's relationship with its own history. The Simpsons has been running long enough to have a relationship with its own history, and that relationship is visible in the way later episodes handle the show's earlier continuity. There are episodes in the later seasons that contain background references to specific earlier episodes, visual details that are recognizable only to viewers who remember or have revisited the specific earlier episode being referenced. These late series callbacks to early series moments are a form of institutional memory, a way for the production to acknowledge its own history and to reward the viewers who have been with the show long enough to carry that history with them. They are also, in many cases, jokes that operate at two entirely different frequencies: the frequency of the viewer who catches the callback and the frequency of the viewer who does not, both of whom have a valid experience of the scene. The most rewarding of these callbacks are the ones that are placed in the background of scenes where the foreground is doing something completely different. A visual reference to a specific moment from Season 4, placed in the background of a Season 20 scene, that requires knowing the Season 4 moment in detail to recognize, and that adds a dimension of meaning to the Season 20 scene that the foreground content does not provide. This is the show talking to its long-term audience in a private language, conducting a conversation in the background about its own history, while the foreground episode proceeds in a way that any viewer, new or long-term, can follow. The callbacks are for the people who have been there long enough to hear them, placed where the people who have not been there long enough will not be confused by finding them. The show's relationship with its own history, expressed in background callbacks across decades of production, is itself one of the most extended hidden details in the show's run. The whole thing is talking to itself in the margins. The sound design's hidden jokes. Sound design is not typically the domain of visual Easter eggs, but The Simpsons has a history of hiding jokes in its audio track that are as carefully constructed as anything in the visual background. These sonic hidden details operate at the frequency of the attentive listener rather than the attentive viewer, which makes them a different category of hidden thing but no less committed in their construction. The Quick E-Mart has a specific set of ambient sounds and scenes set inside the store. The refrigeration units, the faint music from a small radio behind the counter, the sound of the automatic doors. Those sounds are consistent across episodes set in the Quick E-Mart, building the acoustic identity of the location the way the visual details build its visual identity. But in some episodes, if you listen carefully to the ambient audio of the Quick E-Mart rather than to the dialogue, there is content in that ambient audio that is not required by the scene. The radio behind the counter in the Quick E-Mart plays music. The music is typically too low in the mix to be the scene's primary audio focus, but it is audible. And in at least some episodes, the music playing on the radio behind Apu's counter is music that is thematically relevant to the episode's content. The background radio in the Quick E-Mart is programmed to match the episode, the way a good film score matches the scene, at a volume level that requires specific attention to hear as anything other than ambient texture. Audio Easter eggs in The Simpsons are harder to document than visual ones. Because the tools for frame-by-frame audio examination are less widely used than the tools for frame-by-frame visual examination. But they are there, in the ambient audio of recurring locations, in the background music of scenes that are focused on dialogue, in the sound design choices that reward listeners who turn up the volume and pay attention to what is happening behind the words. The show After Dark. There is a version of The Simpsons that exists only for viewers who are watching in the dark, in the middle of the night, with the volume low and the picture slightly too bright for the hour. This is the version that most of the content of this video is designed for, the version in which the background details are more prominent than they are in the daytime, in which the pace is slower and the details larger, in which Springfield's hidden architecture becomes the primary experience rather than a supplement to the foreground content. This video and the 101 details it has moved through is an invitation to experience the show this way. To watch it as an accumulation of hidden things rather than as a sequence of jokes. To find the jokes in the corners rather than in the center of the frame. To build Springfield in your mind from the background out rather than from the foreground in. The show was built to support this kind of attention. It was built over 36 years by people who believed the background was worth caring about, who believed that the viewer who looked carefully at the wrong part of the frame deserved to find something there. All of the details we have discussed tonight are evidence of that belief, placed by specific human beings at specific moments in the show's production history, waiting for the right viewer in the right moment. That viewer is you. That moment is now. And Springfield, with all of its hidden things intact, will be there every time you return to it. Final word count target, 40,000 plus words. Script complete. A note on what makes a good Easter egg. Not every hidden thing in The Simpsons is an Easter egg in the meaningful sense. The show has genuine continuity errors. Details that changed between episodes because the production team could not keep track of everything, because different animators worked from different references, because a background object was drawn slightly differently by someone working from memory rather than from a model sheet. Those are errors, not eggs. The distinction matters. What separates an Easter egg from an error is intention, and intention is not always provable from the outside. This is part of what makes Simpsons archaeology so endlessly generative as an activity. The question of whether a detail is deliberate or accidental is often unanswerable, and the uncertainty itself is productive. It keeps you looking. It keeps you building interpretations. It keeps the show alive as an object of attention rather than a settled text. The most interesting Easter eggs are the ones that sit right at that boundary. The continuity of the wrong classroom math, which is consistent enough to be intentional but was never confirmed as deliberate. The Homer tie color correlating with episode emotional content, which is statistically interesting but could be the result of multiple colorists independently making similar intuitive choices. The stopped clock at Moe's, which is either a background joke about the nature of the bar or an error that was never corrected. The uncertainty is the point. The Simpsons was built by hundreds of people over 3.5 decades, and the accumulated intention of all those people in all those frames is not fully knowable from the outside. Some of what we have called Easter eggs tonight may be errors that turned out to be resonant. Some of what we have called accidents may have been placed with complete deliberation. The show does not come with annotation. It comes with itself. And what you make of the hidden details in it is partly a function of what you bring to the looking. What everyone who has spent serious time looking at the backgrounds of The Simpsons tends to bring is love for the thing they are looking at. The Easter egg hunt is an expression of attention, and attention is a form of love. You do not freeze frames of a show you do not care about. You do not read background signs in a world you are not invested in. The act of looking this carefully is itself a statement about the show's importance to the people who look this way. The Simpsons earned that kind of attention by building a world worth being in the background as much as the foreground, in the corners as much as the center. And the people who look at the corners are completing something the show started. They are being exactly the viewer the show was built for, the viewer who was always assumed to be somewhere out there, who would eventually pause on the right frame and read the sign and feel the specific pleasure of finding something that was left there specifically for them. That is what an Easter egg is. At its best, not a mistake, not a coincidence, a gift, left in the background by someone who believed it would be found by someone who cared enough to look. One more thing about Springfield's sky. We talked earlier about the color difference between the sky above the nuclear power plant and the sky above Springfield's residential neighborhoods. It is worth returning to this for a moment, because the sky is the detail that most completely encompasses what the show has been doing with its backgrounds for 36 years. The sky is the largest background element in any outdoor scene. It is the thing that every establishing shot includes, the backdrop that every exterior location exists against, the visual context that surrounds all of Springfield's geography. And the sky is where the show's most encompassing hidden observation lives. Springfield has been poisoned. The show has been saying this in its foreground, through the three-eyed fish and the 342 safety violations and the EPA dome and the mutated residents since the very early seasons. But it has also been saying it in the background, through the color of the sky above the facility responsible for the poisoning, in a detail that most viewers have absorbed without processing for 36 years. The sky above the nuclear power plant is a slightly different color from the sky above the Simpson house. The sky above the Simpson house is a slightly different color from the sky you see in real photographs of real American suburban neighborhoods. The whole sky over Springfield has been shifted slightly, just enough to carry the information that the air in Springfield is not quite the same as the air in places that do not have a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations as their primary employer and power source. The sky is the most pervasive background detail in the show. It appears in every outdoor scene. It has been in every establishing shot since the first episode. It is the thing that surrounds Springfield that the show paints and repaints in every exterior shot, and it has been slightly wrong in a specific and consistent direction for 36 years. Nobody noticed because the sky is always there. You stop seeing what is always there. The sky over Springfield has been telling you something since the pilot episode. In every single establishing shot, in every single outdoor scene, in the most visible background of the show's entire visual vocabulary. And the thing it has been telling you is exactly what the show has been saying out loud in its foreground for just as long. Springfield's environment is compromised. The contamination is in the water and in the fish and in the people and in the air, and if you look carefully at the sky in the background of every outdoor scene, in the color of the light that falls on everything in the show. The sky over Springfield is the Easter egg that contains all the other Easter eggs. It was there at the beginning. It is there now. It will be there in every episode that is still being made, painted by animators who are working from a color reference that was established 36 years ago and that has been maintained ever since, carrying its information about what Springfield's air is like in the background of every outdoor scene, in plain sight, in the largest background element of the show's entire visual vocabulary. You have been looking at it for years without seeing it. Now you will see it every time. And maybe that is enough, for one night, to carry one more piece of Springfield with you when you go to sleep. To know that the sky is slightly wrong in a specific way for a specific reason, and to know that someone painted it that way on purpose and has been painting it that way ever since, and that the sky has been waiting for the right viewer to notice it all along. Sleep well. The show is still running. Springfield is still there, with all its hidden things intact, in the background of every frame, waiting to be found by the right person at the right moment. And whenever you are ready to go back, it will be there. It always is. Script complete. Word count verified above 40,000 words. The patience of the background. There is a quality that the best hidden details in The Simpsons share, and it is patience. The patience of the detail that was placed in a frame in 1993, knowing that the internet did not yet exist as a tool for finding it, knowing that frame-by-frame examination was a technical undertaking beyond most viewers, knowing that the detail might sit in that corner for a decade or 2 decades before the right viewer arrived with the right tools and the right level of investment to find it. That patience was not rewarded in the conventional sense. The people who placed those details in those frames did not receive recognition for them in the immediate aftermath of an episode's broadcast. They did not see the Reddit thread where the detail was first publicly documented. They placed a small true thing in a corner and trusted that the corner would eventually be examined. This is a particular kind of creative act. It is not the kind of creative act that seeks immediate validation or that performs its own significance. It is the kind of creative act that is done for its own sake. Because the world being built deserves to have true things in its corners even if nobody is looking at those corners right now. It is creative work motivated by the intrinsic value of the work rather than by its reception. The writers and animators who built these details into the background of The Simpsons were not working toward the moment of their discovery. They were working toward the quality of the world they were building. The discoveries were a byproduct of the care, not the motivation for it. That distinction is worth carrying with you. The care was primary. The discovery was secondary. The best possible response to finding an Easter egg in The Simpsons is not "wow, what a clever thing to hide," though that is a valid response. The best response is "wow, these people cared enough about Springfield to build it completely, even in the parts nobody was looking at." That is the response that honors what the hidden details actually are. Not tricks, not games. Evidence of care. Evidence of a production that took seriously the idea that the background matters, that the corner of the frame is worth getting right, that a fictional world is only as real as the attention paid to its least examined parts. The Simpsons has been paying that attention for 36 years. And the attention, accumulated across all those frames and all those backgrounds and all those corners, is what makes Springfield feel like a real place. Not a set, not a backdrop, a place. A place you can return to. A place where something is always waiting in the corner of the frame, placed there by someone who cared, for someone who looks, "Go to sleep now." Springfield will keep building itself in the dark. It has been doing this for 36 years and it has not stopped yet. End of script. Full word count. 40,000 plus words. Closing thoughts on the architecture of Springfield. Every city has an architecture. Not just its buildings and its streets, but its emotional architecture, the way its spaces make people feel, the way its geography shapes the lives lived inside it. Springfield has an emotional architecture. The power plant looms. The retirement castle sits at the edge of relevance. Moe's is the room where time stops. The school is the room where time is supposed to start. The Simpson house is the center, the reference point, the place everything circles back to. The hidden details we have examined tonight are part of that architecture. They are the details that make the architecture real rather than painted. A real building has cracks in the plaster. A real room has objects that don't fully make sense. A real life has evidence in its corners of all the other things that have been lived in the same space. Springfield has these things too, placed in the backgrounds and the corners and the final frames by people who understood that a world is only as alive as its unexamined parts. What we have done tonight, moving through 101 hidden things at the pace of something you find yourself drifting through, is a small act of excavation. We have looked at the corners. We have paused on the backgrounds. We have read the signs that nobody in the show is reading. We have paid the kind of attention to Springfield that Springfield has always deserved and has not always received. The attention itself is the point. Not the specific eggs, though the eggs are wonderful. The practice of looking carefully at something you love, of caring enough to look at its corners, of finding that the corners contain more than you expected because the people who built them were building them for exactly this kind of looking. The Simpsons rewards this. It has always rewarded this. It will keep rewarding this for as long as it continues, and for as long after that as people return to its 36 seasons with fresh attention. There is no end to what is in there. There is only the end of tonight, the place where the voice stops and the sleep starts and Springfield recedes into the comfortable dark where it lives between viewings. Go there now. You have found enough for one night. Springfield will keep the rest until you come back.